Good evening, everybody. So nice to see all of you. Welcome back. Happy New Year, Katona Lewisboro. It is my pleasure to make a motion to return to public session, seconded by Rory. Thank you so much. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Wonderful. Would everybody please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Terrific. Thank you so much. We really appreciate seeing so many members of our community, and tonight we are joined by faculty members who are going to talk with us and share some literacy updates and highlights across the district. We'll have an opportunity to hear an update and to speak about the impact of COVID and the ongoing pandemic in our schools, and also to talk about some exciting work coming out of a facilities subcommittee. So we have a great meeting lined up, and we're very much looking forward to it. Before we turn our attention to those discussions and presentations, we will first look forward to hearing from our Student Board of Education member. Welcome back, Abigail. It's great to see you. And if you're ready, we would love to hear your report.
So throughout the months of January and December, students have participated in many school events, from winter sports games to winter wonderland, and we're getting to have a lot of fun in school outside of academics. Learning is in full swing as we approach the halfway mark of the 2021-2022 school year. So in Campus Congress, over the last 2 months, we have been working to make several changes in our school. At one meeting, we discussed learning through COVID, suggesting things that we wanted to let go, continue, and begin. Workshop Wednesdays will be held throughout the month of February for seniors to attend workshops on mental health, sustainability, relationships, money management, and technology. And our most recent meeting was unfortunately canceled due to snow, but we will continue committee meetings in the next month. So at John Jay High School, the art show opened on December 17th for students to display the art projects they've been working on in all art classes, from painting to ceramics. The fall drama, Two Gentlemen of Verona, was presented December 17th, 18th by the John Jay Theater Workshop. Jazz band, concert band, symphonic band, and wind ensemble performed January 11th for their families to watch. The choir and orchestra concerts were held January 20th. And students had fun making gingerbread houses and watching the ice sculptor on December 21st for Winter Wonderland. All the gingerbread houses were donated to the community center. Amnesty International Club and the sophomore class sold candygrams the week prior to winter break to celebrate the holidays and raise money for their clubs and the class. And winter sports started at the beginning of December, and you can check the athletics calendar to see what games are coming up. I know there's a bunch of basketball and wrestling. At John Jay Middle School, they also held their fall drama, Clue, December 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and their first trimester came to an end on December 7th. Modified sports began at the beginning of December, and they also have many games going on. The orchestra concert was January 10th, and the choir concert was January 19th. At Increase Miller on December 17th, 5th graders enjoyed a pizza party and scavenger hunt that revealed a secret message from around their school. And students participated in a drum circle during music class, taking turns leading the class in rhythm. This helped communication, collaboration, and connection as they made music with their friends. At Katona Elementary School, they held their annual holiday boutique on Saturday, December 4th. They had holiday share wrap night December 16th, and the annual 5th grade versus staff volleyball game was held December 23rd, right before we left for break. At Meadow Pond, the Gift of Giving was held December 1st. Max's Secret Gift Shop was open December 7th and 9th. And lastly, All the Colors We Are is a book by Katie Kissinger, and it was read to kindergartners as they created self-portraits and learned about their similarities and differences.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Were you finished? I want to make sure you were
Yes.
finished. We so appreciate hearing about all of these wonderful activities that are going on across the district. We feel so grateful that so many in-person activities have remained underway even throughout this most difficult month or period of time since we last met to today. And thank you for capturing all of that activity with respect to our in-person musical productions, all of our musicians, our student actors and performers, our artists, our athletes. Students are really meaningfully engaged in so many activities, and it's a pleasure to hear about them. So thank you for being so comprehensive. We really appreciate that. And we're excited to hear about these Workshop Wednesdays that are brand new, so please keep us posted. We hope that you'll be able to avail yourself of them too. And I'll just pause in case there are any questions or comments for Abigail before we move on.
No, just thank you.
I mean, obviously we all love hearing, and I it's the best part of the meeting when we get the report from our student board member. Remarkably, Abigail, you didn't mention the impact really that COVID is having and the fact that people are wearing masks in schools and all that, and that's really reassuring. You kind of give us a glimpse inside the school buildings, each of them, and it's reassuring to me that that's not the first thing that you mentioned, and it's not even mentioned in your report, so I really do appreciate it, so thank you very much.
I was at the John Jay Middle School band concert, I think it was on January 19th, and Miss Frazek, is that the band teacher, had over 120 people on the stage, and I spent most of the time trying to figure out from where they were getting their instruments into their mouths. I had no idea where the holes were coming from different places. And I also want to point out they had 20 percussionists, which I've never seen before. It was just a wall of drums. It was amazing.
Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, it's really amazing to see the level of participation in some of these programs and to see how hard our staff members are working despite really ongoing challenging conditions. The level of management to pull off that concert, I have to think, was really extraordinary. And as poignant and celebratory as it felt as a parent to be back in the buildings, it's also sobering that we are still in an environment where perhaps only one designated family member can attend in person while the other family member is Zooming from home, limiting the density in our auditoriums, impacting the very nature of play. These are ongoing challenging times, and I think our students are eager for the engagement, and we are grateful that our faculty members and administrators are able to create these opportunities. I think this period of time since the last time the Board of Education met on December 9th and today, I think these really have been some of the most challenging weeks as Omicron spiked and the contact tracing grew. And we're very fortunate here tonight that, and I know not to steal the thunder of the COVID update, but that our cases are on the decline. But this has been a really hard period, and really, Abigail, hearing the amazing amount of activity in every building and at every level of the district. And as parents, a little bit getting to have a window into that, as I know many of us have, as board members and as parents, gone to support many of these concerts, performances, plays, etc. We're grateful, and please keep it up, and thank you. It's been really a challenge, but we feel very, very fortunate, very grateful.
I just wanted to recognize the PTOs who have had, I think, a lot to do with many of those activities. I want to give a specific shout out to the high school PTO that got the ice carver, and the ice wolf was so cool and really fun for the kids to watch it happening. And it came out, it was just a really cool thing to have this ice wolf outside of the school. So I think, their partnership has been really crucial during this time. And then if I can just highlight one of the athletic events, I did want to congratulate. We hosted all-county tournament for wrestling this weekend, which is is a big undertaking for our custodial staff and support staff to have 23 schools here, and many wrestlers, and we had 6 of our wrestlers were all county, which means they placed in the top 6 in the county. So it was a really great showing for them.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. So I feel as if we've somewhat seamlessly transitioned from our student board member report to board announcements, which is item 8.01. And with the board's permission, I am going to suggest that we postpone board committee reports, which we have actually attempted to skip over. But on board announcements, before we invite Andrew to share announcements, were there any other announcements? Please, Liz.
This weekend, I spent a very cold couple of hours on Saturday and Sunday handing out test kits with Mr. Selesnik and Rory and other, assorted members of the team here. And I have to say, despite the fact that it sounded really miserable the way I described it, it was genuinely one of the, nicest weekends I can remember. Seeing all kinds of people I haven't seen in a long time and saying hi. And, it was just, I miss the community. And I feel like, I don't know, there's just kind of a little optimism returning right now. Mm-hmm. And I just really want to kind of tap into that and say it was a lovely experience. And I wanted to give a shout out to the 2 different people. On each day, somebody came and made a second pass, and that second pass, they handed us free coffee or beverages. And it was just such a reminder. This is a fantastic community in which we live and full of such wonderful people. And I've missed so many of you. And it was really a very fulfilling experience.
Thank you. Thank you, Liz. And thank you to everybody who volunteered and distributed test kits on a Saturday and Sunday. So many of you sitting here at this table tonight, and also so many of our administrators not present with us here this evening. Tremendous thank you for volunteering your weekend hours to provide test kits, which is amazing to members of our community. We really are very grateful. Other announcements. I will just briefly mention also, in between the last meeting and this meeting, we had a visit from Dr. Volkmar, who visited with parents, members of the community who wished to speak with him. And it was an overview that he provided, and then opportunity for questions and answers. And I think all of us who had the opportunity to attend, and I know many of us here tonight did, learned a lot and really appreciate that opportunity for that interaction. And also just a quick thank you ship to the town of Lewisboro for their ongoing partnership. Rec sports are back. We've had kids in the gymnasiums every weekend since December playing recreational basketball, traveling to Catamount to go to Wee-Ski and whatnot. So thank you to the Recreation Department and to Danelle and to staff members, our custodians, members of the team who work to support that ongoing partnership. We really, again, we need a village to keep kids engaged in this environment, and we're very fortunate to live in a great village. So thank you. And with that, I think, Andrew, we are ready to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Marjorie. I'm going to keep my comments pretty brief tonight because we have a lot to get to, but I certainly want to echo and thank you all for the very positive comments. All of the in-person events, that we're experiencing as we move into the spring are really positive. We've heard a lot about them. I'm very grateful to all the staff members as well as our PTOs, it was mentioned earlier, for making those events possible. It was really important to us to get our students back into as many of their extracurricular activities as possible. We know about the link to mental health there and how important that is, and we want those opportunities to be available. So you've heard a lot about concerts and shows and other things. This coming weekend is the freshman play here at John Jay High School. The Election is the show that they're putting on. So another nice opportunity to come out and see people. There's a really lovely video on the website, actually, you can look at of the students talking about their experience. So that's all going to continue as I knock on wood and say that we're so thrilled that we seem to be moving in this very positive direction. It was talk at earlier board meetings this year, so I do want to call out and mention that on tonight's agenda, we are asking the board to make an appointment for an SRO for the remainder, a school resource officer. We'll be back thanks to Chief Alfano and the Lewisboro PD for helping to find a person who'll be with us effective beginning of February and through to the end of the school year in a full-time capacity in the school, so we're happy about that. And Marjorie has mentioned a couple times, we're going to talk about COVID a little bit later. There's been a lot of updates from the state and some changes. So we want to share all of that with folks who are here and in the audience at home. But we are going to start with a literacy update tonight because we have a number of colleagues who are with us in the audience tonight. We're thrilled about that. And we want them to be fresh with our students tomorrow morning. So that's why we always have them go first when we have colleagues with us. So if it's okay, happy to
Please.
turn over at this point to Mary Ford and to the colleagues who are going to join us. Thank you all. We look forward to hearing it.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm fortunate to be joined by 4 of my colleagues this evening. So Allison Porcelli, who is our district-wide staff developer for literacy. Jackie Kovac. Jackie, a kindergarten teacher at Meadow Pond. Kathy O'Neill, who is our middle school curriculum leader and ELA and social studies teacher at John Jay Middle School. And Emily Cantor, who is our 3-5 curriculum leader and 4th grade teacher at Katona Elementary. So thank you all, my esteemed colleagues. They're the people who do this work every day.
Thank you, Mary Ann. Just allow us to say welcome. It's so great to see you here in person. We have missed all of you dearly, and we are so looking forward to hearing from you. So thank you for joining us and welcome.
Thank you.
So I should start out by saying, well, this is a little tricky. I'll start out by saying that. We had a presentation to the board, if you remember, I believe it was February 6th, 2020. So just before the shutdown and everything. So we thought there'd been a lot of discussion about literacy and a lot of questions. So we thought it might be a good time to look back, to refresh, update. There have been some updates to the program, talk about them, and think about what's different since COVID. So some of this is very similar to what was presented then, but again, there are some updates and changes as well.
Thank you.
I don't know, this is a very tricky, there's a slide about goals, which I don't know if Rich can help me back there. Can't seem to get to it. There it is. Okay, so the goals of our literacy program. So these, again, this is something that really has not changed. Developing those very strong foundational skills when we think about phonological awareness, phonics, print concepts, fluency, all those conventions. Also thinking always about deep comprehension. So that the goal of reading is to understand what we read. Connection between reading and writing instruction. You can see everything that's bolded there on the slide. Most importantly, a lifelong love of reading and writing is really what we seek to instill. But it's also important to mention that we align with the ideals of the learning commitment. We align with our state standards, NYSED's next generation ELA standards, but we also think about social emotional learning competencies. From New York State has some New York State social emotional learning benchmarks, and we base our work around CASEL's 5 competencies, so that's very important to us, and culturally responsive teaching practice. These are things we're always thinking about and trying to embed as we plan our literacy instruction. And also reflecting research-based approaches, acknowledging that there's new research in the field, as well as different perspectives on different things and long-held principles and meta-studies that we always consider. So again, some of the things that we align with, the 5 pillars of reading, we'll just take a look at that in a moment, the standards, learning commitment, and you've seen before, and we'll go into a little more detail later in the presentation, we have focus areas. Our big focus areas right now are the diversity, equity, and inclusion work, social emotional learning work, and sustainability. So also with everything we do, trying to embed those things into our practice. So this was the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. This was a report that came out in 2000. Even back then, there was some controversy, right? There was a minority report that gave some different views, things that were left out. But I think these 5 areas have been longstanding, and the way that many researchers and scholars look at literacy, these different very important areas of literacy instruction.
especially of reading instruction. And then we have New York State Education Department's Next Generation. These are the ELA anchor standards. So it's important to note they were revised, so everyone is very aware of Common Core standards. And New York State revised those standards to the Next Generation standards. That work started in 2017, but full implementation is expected this coming fall in 2022. And those areas you see there, when you think about those foundational skills we mentioned, reading different kinds of text, literary and informational text, writing, speaking and listening, and language. So those are all areas that we consider when we think about literacy. And alongside those, these lifelong practices. So those are very important to us as well, and those are things that please keep in mind as we look at the next few slides when we start to think about the components. So things like reading often and widely from a range of global and diverse texts. We think about our classroom libraries. We think about that practice as a practice that's very important in encouraging a lifelong love of reading, self-selecting text based on interest, monitoring comprehension and applying reading strategies flexibly. All of those things are very important when you think about lifelong reading proficiency. I may have skipped one, sorry. The learning commitment. Of course, that's always at the forefront for us. So when we think about intellectually engaging experiences, we think about relevance to our students' lives, interest, purpose beyond test results, recognizable connections to students' lives, and of course, that active learning environment. And again, these are the focus areas that I mentioned before. So keeping that learning commitment at the center, we think about how we can embed conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion, those social emotional competencies, and the conversations about sustainability as well. Always professional learning has to be surrounding that. And also we think about the use of technology, how we use that to enhance instruction, and always thinking about our pedagogy as well. That's just a little context for the conversation, but I will turn it over to my colleague Allison to talk about some of the components of literacy instruction.
Okay, so the components that I'm going to talk about here on this slide that looks like a puzzle, all of these components here work together to support those 5 pillars that Mary was just referencing. And many of these different components here most of them are in elementary, but there's also implications for secondary model as well. But starting with interactive read aloud, that's a really big component that we use in the classroom, where we're reading texts that are higher level than the students, and we're modeling high-level comprehension strategies and giving students a chance to talk and practice those strategies. And it's really a big place where we're working on developing language comprehension, which in turn supports reading comprehension, high-level reading comprehension, as they move into the older grades. So it's sort of this like pay-it-forward model. So the high-level work that we do in kindergarten, when kids can then read texts more fluently in first grade, they then use that information to help them comprehend at higher levels, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the interactive read aloud. Shared reading and shared and interactive writing, which are on those sides. There's similar processes. One is shared reading as a whole class model, where you have an enlarged text that's just slightly above the kids' level. And here is where you're going to be modeling and having the kids practice reading strategies, things like decoding words, fluency, and comprehension. But it's closer to what they'd be doing in independent texts. And same with interactive writing. That's a place where they'd be creating a text together as a class. The kids even come up and share the pen and practice spelling words, practice using the phonics concepts that you've taught in context of actual writing pieces. And then you have reading workshop and writing workshop, which is the independent portion. So where the teacher does a very short lesson targeted and at something the whole class could practice, but the bulk of the time is spent with kids independently reading
and writing, and the teachers going around and pulling small groups and targeting and differentiating instruction. And then word study, which is a place where all of this comes together, where we teach phonics, phonemic awareness, and vocabulary, and students are practicing that inside of reading and writing workshop, and we're helping students transfer those skills in shared reading and interactive writing. So you can kind of see how that puzzle, all those pieces really work together. And this is just a slide that's highlighting how each of those components hits upon those reading pillars that Mary spoke about and those next generation standards. So you can take a look at how that all works together. And as we were saying before, a lot of these processes are reciprocal, as Mary mentioned. So even when anything that I'm reading aloud, if I'm reading aloud a nonfiction text, for example, that's going to support kids if they're reading nonfiction. It's also going to support them when they're writing nonfiction because it serves as a mentor. But also in terms of phonics, if what I'm teaching in phonics, the kids can practice when they're writing, when they're doing their encoding and they're using those segmenting skills that they've learned inside of their phonemic awareness. Also, they're then practicing those when they go to read texts and they're decoding. So all of it is reciprocal. And it's, as it says on the third bullet there, what's wonderful is when we have independent reading and independent writing, it's an opportunity for teachers to go and see how these skills are transferring and to coach that transfer. And then especially as we move into the older grades, but even starting as young as kindergarten, we do have students also write about reading as a way to enhance their comprehension. So they do a lot of that oral practice, but then they also will start by just jotting on a Post-it. They start like in kindergarten, they might just draw a little smiley face if the character feels happy. But they start working on writing about their reading, and it's a way for them to continue to increase their comprehension of a text. And then I'll just briefly introduce word study. So word study, as I mentioned before, works on these three pillars: phonemic awareness, phonics, and vocabulary. And our main programs in the district, we use Heggerty for phonemic awareness instruction, Foundations for phonics, and Wordly Wise is for our vocabulary. Wordly Wise is 4th and 5th grade. Heggerty is K1, and Foundations is K3. And so Jackie's going to talk about.
So for Heggerty, I'm going to talk it's our phonemic awareness program, which is what we do with hearing and listening to sounds. And there's, speak up? Sure.
Maybe you can just mic a little closer to you, Jackie.
How's that? Oh, sorry. Now that works. Got it. Thank you. So Heggerty is our phonemic awareness program, and that is done through hearing of the sounds. It's all auditory. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about Heggerty on the next slide. So I'll come back to that. But Foundations is our explicit phonics instruction program that we use K through 3. The program is taught every day. In kindergarten, we teach sounds, letters, and handwriting. It's a multi-sensory program, so for anybody with the young children and parents out there, you'll remember the kids when they do the tapping, we do the stretching of all the sounds. And you can see that it transfers to our reading and writing, because as they're reading words, we'll say tap it out. As they're writing, we'll say tap out those sounds. Grades 1, 2, 3 move on to blends, diagraphs, CVC words, long and short vowels, silent E, vowel pairs, and all those glued sounds are in their program. And I think I'm going to hold Heggerty, and we can move to 3rd grade.
For 4th and 5th grade, we
Fourth
have
and fifth.
Wordly Wise. I'll just talk briefly about a little about the program. It picks up where Foundations leaves off. The program focuses on morphology, which is the study of words and how they're formed. So the program there's 20 lessons in the program, and each lesson begins with a word list of 15 words. And they're listed in alphabetical order. When learning each word, the students are given a definition, they're given the phonetic spelling, parts of speech, and they're given these short partner activities that the kids really enjoy. for example, if the word is ease, it'll say, tell your partner about the place you feel most at ease. And it just gets them talking about the words and put it in a little bit of a context for them. Each lesson then goes in and has 5 different activities that reinforce the meaning of each word. They also give students the opportunity to learn and practice a variety of things, including applying the meaning of each word in context. They learn synonyms and antonyms, prefixes, suffixes, and roots. They learn how to put these words in sentences, so they're practicing sentence structure. And there's also, at the end of each lesson, a vocabulary extension, which highlights one word and gives additional parts of speech along with discussion and writing prompts. So it's very thorough. At the end of each lesson, there's a multiple choice assessment that teachers can use to assess each student. There are also, for every 2 to 4 lessons, there's a review. So students are able to revisit the words that they now know on their own, which is great. And the creators of Wordly Wise have also partnered with a technology tool, learning tool called Quizlet. And so they're able to access these words through Quizlet online. And so it was really helpful during the pandemic when we were at home. They were able to access this. There's a variety of games, matching. They can study the words. They're also able to, there's like a dictation, so the online program will say the word and they can spell it. They also will give a sentence and they can write the word that the sentence is referring to. So the online program is really, really useful for the kids.
So at the middle school and the upper levels, word study obviously looks a little different. We really focus on essential academic vocabulary and high frequency words. So the teachers take those words and develop master lists by looking at grade level vocabulary that has high frequency in both fiction and nonfiction. And we look at their content areas as well. For example, the 6th grade has a master list of almost 200 words that we've created that cycle throughout the year. And each week the students are exposed to between 5 and 10 words. We teach them how to define the word in context. So that's a strategy that they could apply when they're reading independently. We also identify what part of speech the word is so that they know how to use it in speaking and in their writing. And then we give them multiple opportunities throughout the week to practice using those words, and it's in a variety of ways. So they'll use them with partners to write creative stories, which they absolutely love. We will have them develop study strategies because we try to incorporate how do you study vocabulary and create what I call memory tape to make these words stick in your head. We do a lot of pairing with visuals. We'll put visuals up on the board as like a do now, and the students have to try to figure out what vocabulary is represented in the image, which is another great way to remember, especially for visual students. We also use Quizlet. They love playing Quizlet live. They love using the games as review. They have the matching, as Emily spoke about. But the nice thing is because the words cycle throughout the year, by the end of the year, they have truly mastered them. And not only are they using them and transferring them to their writing, they're using them in their speech. And they're so funny, they'll be like, you got vocabbed. You know, they get excited when they hear each other start to use the words. And, you know, you really see how their vocabulary truly builds. So it's a really great approach.
Thank you, Kathy. So we thought we'd talk a little more about Heggerty, which is a program that's relatively new in our district. So Heggerty, as Jackie mentioned before, focuses on phonemic awareness, which is all auditory. So we will be able to take a little peek into Jackie's classroom. So we have access to something called My Heggerty. All teachers have that. So they have videos for each lesson. They have some professional learning modules embedded. And so in this video clip that you'll see, and I think Rich is about to play it for me, you'll see Jackie's class watching the video, but Jackie, I'll let you.
Do you want me to talk about it a little first?
Sure.
With the Heggerty program, Mary was saying, it works on the phonemic awareness. So it's all auditory. It's all through the sounds. We're listening for the phonemes. And the students, you'll see them doing many things. Isolating sounds, beginning, middle, and end. They'll be segmenting. You'll see in this, they're going to be chopping sounds. So for like the word new, if they were, we would be ooh, and then they put it together, new. It has 3 letters, but it has 2 phonemes. We're adding and deleting phonemes, and we do, the kids, their favorite part they love is the substitution, where they'll be given us, say app. If you put a before it, what word do you have? You have map. And they'll say that. And then if you take away the and you put in a s, what's the new word? Sap. So it's a lot of wordplay, and they really enjoy it. And you'll see once again the hands, and they use those again when they're reading and writing, which is wonderful. You'll see it applying to their work. We have the book, and we also have the videos from the district, which is really nice. The woman you're going to see is Mrs. Botari. We think we know her. And the kids will follow along with her. What's really nice is teachers tend to go between using the book and the videos. What's nice about the videos is it gives me time to see the students, what they're doing. And I'll stop, I'll let you say. And you can see them going through. What's nice going back and forth, as I said, it's a nice way for me to assess. I can watch the kids as they're doing and assess where they are. And it also gives me a time to come up alongside the students. So if somebody's having a more difficult time, I can sit in there with them and really be able to work with them as they're following along with her. So it's nice to have both of those pieces together with the program.
And speaking of assessment, all of our kindergartners this year, starting in February and March, are going to be assessed with the Heggerty screener to get a baseline. And then after that, first graders, even this year and last year, we had first graders who were, maybe a concern or might be up for RTI, also then get the Heggerty screener. And even some second grade, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's been really helpful to us, especially in instances where students, sometimes we see students who are making progress, they're kind of hitting benchmarks, and yet teachers have a lingering concern. And so sometimes giving this assessment has given us a window into what that concern might be, right? They might still be struggling with phonemic awareness. For example, students who are reading well, but they're actually using context more, and it shows up more in their spelling than their decoding because they use context so well. So it's been helpful to have that insight and help us to know how to target any instruction or interventions that we might provide. And so wanted to talk about independent reading because that's a big cornerstone of our literacy program. So obviously it works on everything, right? Fluency, comprehension, vocabulary, and then the standards are about reading literary and informational text. In the lower grades, obviously their stamina is a little bit different, and we're also finding with COVID that's a concern. Stamina is sometimes impacted, but I think it's kind of coming around now that students are used to being in school for a longer time. But students choose their own books based on interest and the genre or topic being studied, mostly with some teacher guidance. So we want students to read books that are appropriate texts for them so that they can access those texts and get lots of practice. And you'll see there is some controversy in the reading world about independent reading and having students work independently and how much you can depend on how much they're reading. But you can see by those statements from the International Literacy Association, National Council of Teachers of English, and even NICED, that it's an essential component of literacy instruction. And so we tried to make the most of that. And then I'll turn it over to some of my colleagues to talk about how discussion supports comprehension as well.
Yes, so discussion in the classroom is in all grades, but in upper grades, teachers have what we call mentor texts and read alouds that they read to the students, where they have built-in stopping points where they will ask questions to the whole class. This not only allows the teacher to model their thinking aloud and the process that they're going through as they're reading the text, but it also gives students scaffolded higher level thinking and higher level questioning techniques that allow them to think more deeply about the text, which is what we want them to do independently. But in order to do that, a lot of modeling needs to happen. And that's where the whole class discussion comes in. This happens throughout all parts of our day. It's not just reading in the content areas, and teachers are constantly doing this type of work. And then with the whole class discussions, students also have the opportunity after their independent reading to bring this into their partnership work. Students are partnered up with a reading partner could be similar reading level, could be interest, however they're partnered up. And they're able to practice these discussion techniques with each other. And the teacher is able to walk around and coach in and listen in to how it's going. In the upper grades, students learn that the most effective conversations happen when you come prepared with an idea. So that's where the think aloud happens with the modeling in the whole class. And they see that if I come with some sort of an idea, I can then have a talking point off of. And so the students work together to help each other build off an idea, we call grow an idea in the classroom, into something more complex. This can result in talking about the theme, character interpretations, lots of reactions that they're having about the things that they're reading, reactions to the plot or events of the text. And then usually after, if in the upper grades when we're reading a whole class text, the teacher's reading a chapter book, at the end, once they've been practicing this type of discussion, we have something called a grand conversation. It's a fancy way to say fancy way of saying whole class discussion. But the difference is the teacher kind of takes a back seat, and the students are the ones leading the conversation. And so they come with an idea prepared, and they learn how to build off each other's ideas. They learn how to take turns. They learn how to agree and disagree respectfully, and also, more importantly, use text evidence to back up what they're trying to say. So this all builds, and students need the model from the whole class all the way, to be able to, in independent practice with each other, to be able to then have that grand conversation where they're able to kind of, it's a beautiful thing to see when the teacher can just kind of step back and guide them and not be the one, front loading the ideas.
The transition's amazing from the elementary school to the middle school, because really the middle school takes everything they do and kind of just builds on it. We have the same variety of discussion structures at the middle school level. We have the whole class mentor text that we usually start with, so students can go back to it as a reference. In the mentor text, we teach the strategies just like they do in the elementary school. We also do a lot of partner work, and we do small groups, especially book clubs in the middle school is very popular. And in book clubs, it kind of like what Emily is saying, the skills really build on each other. And in the book clubs, the students are planning out their reading, they're determining the focus, they're determining the amount they're reading every night, and they hold each other accountable for that learning. So it's really nice to see how they build on that. I think no matter what structure you're using, the result is always the same. They're examining texts at a much deeper level. When they're discussing them, they're considering the ideas of other people in respectful ways, as Emily is saying. They're challenging their own thinking by listening to the opinions of others and their perspectives, and ultimately they're making sense out of complex texts. And they do that all through discussion because, we know middle schoolers just love to talk. One of my personal favorites is Socratic Seminar. It's kind of what Emily was saying. It's a really nice way to have where the students guide the conversation. They create the questions for discussion based on plot, and we really push them to get away from the very simple questions on setting, but then start looking, more deeply at character, how character can lead them to theme, what kinds of themes are in the stories, and using the text to support their thinking. One thing I like about Socratic Seminar especially is because there's a lot of students who are very bright, but they struggle to articulate their thinking in writing. So when you take that component away and you put them in Socratic Seminar, they really shine. And it's always amazing to see how they can take simple ideas from other students and then build on them and take them to such a higher level. And I feel like in Socratic Seminar, the students come together almost as a community of readers, and they all walk away with these aha moments. And again, it takes a little while to kind of train them, but you sit outside the circle and they start kind of looking at you, and I stop looking at me, stop looking at me, and then all of a sudden after a couple of practice rounds, I'm not even in the room, and they lead the conversation, and it's truly amazing. Discussion's really an important component to this literacy approach.
And then complementing the classroom discussion, the opportunity for some online discussion. So we've made the most of Schoology and tools like that so that students can extend the conversation beyond the classroom conversation. So obviously in the last 2 years, that's become increasingly important to us as well. So just to talk a little bit about the text in our classroom in the next few slides, we'll focus on this, but this is a statement from NYSED and from the preamble to the next generation standards, but talking about the expectation that students read often and widely from a range of and from diverse texts. So that's really important. So when we think about our classroom libraries, which you'll hear about in a few minutes, that's an important consideration. And also this balance of classical and contemporary literature, full length, shorter text, variety of cultures and viewpoints. So just so many things to consider when you think about the text that students will be reading in our classrooms over time. Allison and Jackie are going to talk to us about some considerations for text for early readers.
So many of us participated over the summer, especially the lower grade teachers, in a book study of a book called Shifting the Balance by Carrie Yates and Jan Birkins, which is about bringing the science of reading into our reading literacy practices. And talked about a few different shifts, and a couple of those have big implications for the texts that we use for our early readers. So one big shift that they talked about was taking this idea of readers reading with MSV, meaning syntax and visual, and basically saying, yes, they do all those three things, but we need to put more emphasis on reading with the visual first. So they talk about it as shifting it to visual, that you want to prompt kids to use the visual, which means the print on the page first, and then confirm their attempts at the word with meaning and syntax. So of course they're still using all three, but we really want to prioritize that visual. And so our text selection is really important for that, because we want kids to have more opportunities to be able to practice using those visual skills based on the things that we've taught them. And they talked about these three tensions that we have in the text that we have in our classrooms. So the top one, it's a little hard to see, so I'll talk about it, is the level of decodability versus predictability. So we want to make sure that there's enough regular words in a text that kids can decode, right? If there's so many irregular words, it's going to be hard for them to practice. So we want to make sure there's lots of CVC words and regular words within their grasp. But on the other hand, we also want to make sure that, there's enough patterns and illustrations that it's easy for them to predict. If you just put all decodable words, then, and they have no anchor, then that's hard for them too. So there's a tension there. Then you also have novelty versus redundancy. So novelty, is there enough new words for them to practice? You want them to be able to practice these skills over and over for them to solidify them, and not just on the same words. But in redundancy means, we want to make sure that there's also opportunities for them to have repeated practice and get some fluency. So there's another tension there. And then the orthographic value of the text versus the sense-making value. We want to make sure that the texts are aligned with the phonics that we've been teaching, that they have opportunities to use those phonics skills. But also we want to look at those texts and make sure that there's natural language patterns, that the kids can make sense of those texts. So there's all these tensions, and they have these three wonderful examples. So on the left, there's a decodable text, which is, pretty much mostly to the left in terms of it. I think, can Les get a red pet? Which has yes, he can. So it has a lot of regular decodable words, opportunities for them to practice. It matches up with phonics. However, it's, it might be lacking in natural language patterns, repeated patterns, and opportunities for them to use predictability. The text all the way on the right, which we have all of these examples in our classroom. The text all the way on the right: children can climb, children can swing, kids can read those texts no problem because they're predictable. The illustrations are really strong. However, they don't really necessarily always have to use the visual component because the picture's right there. So that's too far to the right. So the text that they show in the middle is what they call an aligned text. And this is the work we've really been trying to do, is looking at our libraries to find these more aligned texts, but where it says the pup can run. Kids can decode that. They can use the picture. The language pattern is natural. And they can practice those skills that they've been learning. So Jackie's going to talk a little bit about the work that teachers have been doing at their libraries.
So what it does is it gives them, trying to find that book, you want them to practice that skill that you've taught. So if in Foundations I'm teaching about digraphs and I have a group of kids and they're ready for that, for reading and decoding, I want to find books that is going to support that, that's going to give them enough practice. So I need to have books that have that skill, that's that decodability and that practice, but there also has to be other pieces that it sounds more natural and they can read and keeps their interest. So I think as teachers, we're going through our libraries and we're making sure we have a mix of those books. And when we sit down and pull that small group, that book we choose is very purposeful. Because we want to, I'm far away again. I think what we want to try to do is make sure that they have that practice with what we're doing. And there's a very explicit connection that we're making as teachers between the lessons that we're doing and then having them have time to practice with those books.
And so that brings us right to our classroom libraries. And our classroom libraries are organized really to support kids with their independent reading. And so that they can access them independently and they can find themselves in the library, that they can be drawn to it. So we organize them in different ways. Sometimes we'll have baskets organized by, popular authors or by series. Lots of kids get really hooked onto, that's what gets them to be readers a lot of times, is the series. Genres like mystery, that might hook a kid in. Topics, like you can see over on the left, there's one that's like, I love sports. So kids who love sports can find books that they love. And then level. And level, you'll see reading levels. You'll see that a lot in K-1 classrooms because kids are still learning how to navigate the books. So it's very helpful for them to go to a basket of books on their level. And then as they move up in the grades, you'll see less and less organized by level. The teacher may still know the level, but it's more organized in the other ways that I mentioned.
And it's really also the interest of the children. Like in kindergarten, the beginning of this year, a group of kids were very into skateboarding. So we pulled a lot of those skateboarding books. And then I went through and found books that were decodable on their level, but also full of interest and had those pictures that would keep them. And they, were reading those books and sticking with those books and trying to figure it out because skateboarding is really cool.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So in the upper elementary, as Allison was saying, we want to move away from students just thinking that they are a certain level, and because you go into a library or a bookstore and there isn't a level. We want them to start understanding, what's in a book and how they can connect to them. And so in our classroom libraries, we, think of that as windows and mirrors, which I'll explain in a minute. But at the beginning of each year, we not only spend time getting to know each other, but we spend time getting to know our libraries. It's the first thing that kids see when they come into the classroom. And I have to give a shout out to Mary Allison and our administrators because they've worked really hard to give teachers the opportunity to build those libraries. And if you have the chance to walk into any elementary school in our district, there's quite an array of books. They're welcoming, and I can remember when I was in elementary school, my books were like yellow and old, and we don't want to read them. So we spend time in the beginning of the year, as I said, getting to know each other. Our school librarian and worked closely with teachers in upper grades to help students create identity maps, which is giving them the opportunity to create something that reflects and resembles their authentic self. They share these identity maps and they really get to know each other and who they are. And we transfer that to books. We read books with characters that are dynamic, and we create identity maps for those characters. And then they can relate to them and see, oh, I also am like this character. And they're able to grab onto that text and feel like they're really in it. It's a beautiful thing to see when a child goes, I really like books with kids that persevere through their challenges. So we look at those as books that are mirrors. They mirror themselves. So we create a library where there's characters who persevere, characters that overcome friendship obstacles, about sports enthusiasts, characters that go on adventures, anything that a child can really connect with and see themselves in. We also fill our libraries with books that give students opportunities to express empathy with characters that they can't necessarily see themselves as. And we call that we look at that like windows. So these books can be about characters with different family dynamics, characters that go through some social issues that they're not experienced with, characters that have disabilities that they go through in life. And so when children are able to see themselves in a book and they're able to really connect with who they are, then they're able to do the highest level, which is have empathy for characters in books, which is where we really want them to, be. We want them to read the books that they love, the series they love, but we also want them to connect with these characters because that enables them to go out in life and experience and, be able to handle and go through experiences in life that they learn through books. So that's a little bit about mirrors and windows.
Very similar at the middle school. Emily, you're stealing on my thunder. Sorry. The middle school actually is currently working in collaboration with our library media specialists to update our classroom libraries right now. So as Emily said, we're really looking to include new, diverse, relevant, engaging books for adolescents where they can see themselves and they can start to take on the perspectives of others as well. As part of that, we are also including texts that support our current units. So we're looking at some of the authors from their author study units, social issue books, as well as books students recommend because they want to read what their friends are reading because their friends said it's really good. So we're trying to have a nice blend with a wide range of levels to meet all students' needs. But currently, the students really love just going down to the library. And our librarian also comes into the classrooms on a regular basis. She does book talks. So the students get to hear books from different genres, different authors. They write down anything that piques their interest in their readers' notebooks. This way they have a nice list of potential reads that they can pull from when they're ready to pull a new book.
And I think we're going to see an example here,
Oh,
Kathy, of
yes.
a Padlet that some of your students created.
Yeah, so
There we go.
There you go. In the middle school, Mary had mentioned before, one of the goals is obviously to build reading stamina, but it's also to really just foster a love for reading. So in their independent reading, that's where we're trying to foster that. And the middle school about 2 years ago created a digital portfolio for their independent reading. This is an example of one of my current sixth graders. And we do this in Padlet, and it really captures their reader identity. It shows, by looking at this particular one, you can really see the depth and breadth of her reading, the genres that she's interested in, the authors that she's currently enjoying. We use this Padlet for a variety of things. The librarian can come into the classroom. She sits with the students. She uses the Padlet as a conferencing tool to make recommendations for new books. The students absolutely love to share their Padlets with each other, and they can learn from each other and get great ideas, make recommendations to each other, especially when they're what I call a genre rut and they're just reading the same thing over and over. So trying to push themselves a little. It's an opportunity for goal setting and reflection. You can see there's writing on the Padlet as well. The students get to pick how they want to respond to the book. It is not a summary. And they don't respond to every book. They respond to the books that speak to them. And it could be about theme. It could be something they noticed about writer's craft. It could be how a character solved a conflict and overcame an adversity. Another thing that we love about the Padlets, and we're going to be working on and sending a letter home to parents, is it's really a great tool for parents to get a window into their children's readerly life and have some conversations about reading as well. So that's our Padlet.
Yeah, that's really nice.
And that follows them through the middle school. So that's it's created in sixth grade and it goes through eighth grade.
Very cool.
Yeah, and just to mention too, our digital collections are something that we've worked on through the library and for the classroom use. So we have some newer programs, Mayan, Literacy Footprints, so that when students aren't in the classroom, they're able to access those texts as well. So it's a combination of physical and digital text. So just, thinking about students who may struggle with reading and how we might identify them, just say a few words about that. So our universal screeners, those things have not changed. We still use Ames Web Plus, which is a standardized norm referenced assessment. That's something we use kindergarten through eighth grade. We also use the Teachers College Independent Reading Inventory. It's standardized, not norm reference. There are benchmarks for every other month of the school year, so that helps us to kind of match students to text in the classroom. But when either of those assessments give us any indication that a student needs a closer look, you'll also see lots of assessments there. That's not an exhaustive list, but some of the things that we use that our interventionists may use to get a better understanding of what's going on with our students and how we might target an intervention for a student. And just to mention some of the interventions we use, so some of the published ones, Foundations is really our classroom program, but it could be used as an intervention as well, and is in some cases. Just Words and Wilson Reading System. So Wilson Reading System, you've heard of before, and it's an Orton Gillingham-based intervention. Barbara Wilson is the author of Foundations, Just Words, and Wilson. Just Words is more of a small group version of Wilson, so the understanding is you would do it with a small group of students, whereas Wilson, it's usually just one or two students at a time. It could be larger, but it's a little more intensive, goes a little more slowly. We also have Read 180 at our middle school and high school. That's a Scholastic product. And Level Literacy Intervention, that's Fountas and Pinnell. So those are some of the published programs we use. But in addition, just small group work based on student needs. So some of the things we think about are students' strengths as well as their weaknesses. And the transfer, I think that's one of the things we focus most on. Sometimes students can demonstrate a skill in isolation. And so it's easier in a very controlled setting with controlled text to demonstrate mastery of a skill. But then if you take a book out of the classroom library, or you go to Barnes & Noble or your school library, it may be harder to transfer those skills, or to writing. So the focus of the intervention is sometimes we know they can do it in isolation, but helping to coach them to transfer that knowledge or skill to more authentic reading and writing experiences. So just as we finish up, a few questions for our curriculum leaders. And I just want to mention also, we also have an ELA curriculum leader at the high school, Jason Malky. He wasn't able to be with us this evening. He did send some notes, so I'll be sharing some of his thoughts on that. But just going back to those focus areas, we thought it would be nice for the board to hear from our leaders how these focus areas are impacting your classroom instruction.
I think in the elementary schools, a couple of the projects that we have done over the years, we did, I think it was the year before COVID hit. Maybe it was 2 years before, Danelle will remember. We did a program, in our writing program, the students do opinion writing and persuasion, and one of the students wrote a letter to Mike Jumper, actually, saying that she wanted solar panels over the playground. And so this letter was sent out, and as it turned out, at the time, I wasn't even really quite aware of it. There's all these solar panels at the high school. And so they wound up writing letters. Everybody came. We got to go see the high school. We came up, and they got to see the solar panels, and the kindergartners were working on all that. So it was a wonderful tie-in of that sustainability with our writing, which was wonderful. This year, with our diversity, our show and tell unit in the past, the students would bring in items, usually toys that they loved. And this year, we just put in a different lens on it. Instead, we had, when we were doing our identity work and a Zoom conference with the parents, we were talking about our identity maps, and families were doing that together. I spoke to them and said, instead of the show and tell, we're going to bring in items that mean something to you and your families. So instead of the toys, it was a me box, and they're still in the classroom. So the students were talking about things that were important to them. It was their relatives. It was maybe a picture of certain food or different countries or flags or different pieces that mean something to them, their identity. So it tied in beautifully with our writing unit, and it's just looking at it through a slightly different lens. So there's a lot of wonderful tie-ins that we've been able to do throughout the years. So.
Picture books are just fabulous, and there's just so many current picture books right now that just tie into every, a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and along with social emotional learning. So read alouds are constantly happening in elementary classrooms. You can find pretty much any read aloud on things that are happening current, as well as in the past. Anything that could tie into the content areas. And then social emotional learning, it's so important. We start our day with a morning meeting, and by reading a book, you can open up a discussion on something that happened out on the playground, conflict resolution. I mean, the opportunities are just endless with picture books, and that's, kids, especially in the upper grades when they're in 4th grade, I try as much as possible to read as many picture books, because that is not just for, the lower elementary grades. There's so many messages that can be shared through those. So the more opportunities that students are given to hear stories and relate to these characters, the more they'll be able to apply it to their own lives and, build that discussion, open up, share, which is, what we all hope to have, a classroom where kids feel safe and are able to share their opinions and ideas. So I can't say enough about picture books. I can't buy enough. I can't ask for enough. I have a whole shelf, and the kids are constantly going to read those books, coming back to them. So
I think at the middle school level, when you look at that chart, the thing that stands out most is the social emotional learning. Adolescence, it's such an important time in their life. They're trying to figure out who they are. So I think in ELA, our biggest focus has been on the identity work and really trying to help them make sense of who they are. And while they start identity work in the elementary school, identity is fluid and constantly changing. And we're constantly going back to our maps and revising them and adding to them. And we found that this really started overlapping with our equity work as well. And the students have to understand who they are first before they can start to understand who other people are. And we need them to, we did a lot of work with empathy, as Emily had mentioned earlier, and really direct instruction of empathy to try to teach them to be able to step into the shoes of other people and be able to take a variety of perspectives, even when it's not your perspective. And as a result, what we started to notice, and this is my goal, one of my goals this year as CL, they came out with the social justice standards, and I thought it would be very interesting to start to use the social justice standards as guiding questions as we're looking at text, and getting to the students to think in those 4 domains of identity, diversity, justice, and then action, because that's ultimately what we want. We want them to be stand-up citizens who take action in the world. And so we're starting to develop guiding questions that we can use as we're reading text. And because really what we practice in our reading is what gets us ready for life. And we really need to get our children ready for being able to navigate the challenging society that they have before them today. So I think that's our big focus in middle school.
Thank you. And I know Jason shared that, the summer read this year, Dear America, the author Jose Antonio Vargas, and having the webinar, that was a big focus for the department. They're really looking at all of the books that they read with students with that lens, and they actually have a retreat day planned this month to use that lens to look at the 9-12 curriculum. So it is having an impact for sure.
Yeah, that's great.
And just some photos from elementary. I think, Jackie, a lot of those are your classroom,
they are.
correct? Right,
Yeah.
so different.
They're having a discussion, they're having a discussion about skin color. We were looking at the crayons and how are they going to draw themselves and their family and what colors. They were looking at all the colors, and you can see them pointing and talking about it. On the other side is they were drawing family maps. So once again, we pulled those out because they were drawing portraits first of themselves and then of their family. And then the middle, we talked about families, and we started a chart, and we were reading just about lots of different types of families, so we were constantly adding on to the chart. One of the things you can see is the heart with love, because what we coming back to is there's lots of different types of families. Not all families look the same, but the one thing they have in common is the love for one another. So.
Beautiful. And then it's secondary, also some photos. I think some got cut off there, but some identity map work that's going on, and some small group work, Kathy, from your classroom.
Yeah. Just an example of how we pull kids for small groups and target some specific skills, and that's them sharing their identity maps. They had to do Post-its. They did a silent stroll where they walked around and looked at everybody's map, and then they wrote 2 connections or a connection they could make to each map and a question they had. And then when we were done with the stroll, you went back to your map, and if you felt comfortable answering the question, you could then seek out whoever asked it and answer that question. So it was a nice opportunity to learn about each other in a comfortable way.
Thank you. And just lastly, some questions for all of you, thinking about your practices in light of the last few years and any adjustments you made in terms of COVID. What opportunities do you see, and what do you worry about? And then thinking also about how our students respond to our reading and writing instruction.
I think at least for the elementary grades, and we know how important small group work is for our students, and I think that was the hardest piece with COVID, was not being able to have those small groups. And if you could pull a small group, it was 6 feet away from you. And I think that last year it made so many of us realize we always knew it was important, but it made us realize just the importance of that, and how we're so grateful that we're back to being able to have those small groups again. I think one of the opportunities that happened was being able to still keep pieces of the Zoom. This year, I wanted to do identity maps with my students. And with kindergartners, it's kind of hard. They really don't draw well. they do their best if they're watching, and they're wonderful. And writing is a little bit tricky. So to have an identity map for 5-year-olds is a little difficult. So what I did was I did a Zoom at 7 o'clock at night. I sent the paper home, and the parents all got on, and I talked about it. I shared my identity map so they knew what to do. And then together, they did their identity map. So they were able to write, oh, these are the countries our parents come from. These are the foods we like. And the kids were drawing. And I just sat back and watched, and it was wonderful to see all of the kids and parents working on this together. So there's pieces of that I never would have, a Zoom at night 2 years ago, a Zoom call with parents would have been unheard of. So as much as we've learned from Zoom, I think there's pieces of it, there's still opportunities that I think we can keep. It's a nice, that's the one piece, is the family connections was really nice. We had parents, we did our, for parents as reading partners, grandparents Zoomed in from other states. You know, it was really nice, those connections to parents. You know, there's a bunch of grandparents that I feel who were there for Wednesdays that I got to know really well. And I don't think that would have happened. You know, so there are pieces of it, as difficult as it has been, I think you take those positive pieces and maybe we can carry some of those through. So, and I think responding, our kindergartners, if you come into the room, they'll tell you they're super readers and they're super writers, and they can do everything. So it's wonderful. I think they really see themselves as readers and writers.
Awesome.
That's great.
I was just going to say that. Sorry, I didn't want to cut Emily off. I think
I
it.
thought we were going in a line.
Oh, sorry. I think COVID really made us slow down. And I think we made important decisions about curriculum in the sense of like focusing on what was important and really going into depth rather than, you know, trying to cover. And I think one of the biggest challenges was when, you know, we had trying to do writing process on Zoom was very difficult, very challenging to conference and give kids feedback immediately was definitely a challenge. But with that said, I think some of the like Schoology and gave us so many opportunities for kids to express themselves and show their understanding of things in different ways, like video presentations, discussion threads, expressive read-alouds, creative writing opportunities that they could share a document and be writing together. So there were a lot of different little opportunities that kind of came up, which we didn't expect. One thing I worry about is in this fast-paced world that these kids live in, and with all this access to digital media, and they're constantly, any second they have, they're on their iPhone, you know, how do we keep them rooted in real books? And, you know, with that deeper, meaningful comprehension, and just trying to strike that balance between the two. So that's something that I'm always, you know, helping them try to navigate. Just something to think about.
I think one of the challenges that I faced was just that the contact, the personal ability to give kids feedback. On Zoom, you know, it was hard, you know, even just pointing to their work and saying, that's awesome. You know, that makes a huge difference. And I think that's what I miss the most. And I think that's what I make sure I do the most now, is, you know, whether they're, you know, whether I'm physically handing them a book saying, I know that you're going to love this because you also, you know, have a sister that annoys you or whatever the case may be. And just making those opportunities as much as I can, because I missed it tremendously, and I think that they did too. And I have the same, you know, concerns as Kathy with reading. You know, we talk so much about our libraries, and they sat there not being able to be used through the pandemic. We had to, you know, sit them in the quarantine bin or whatever you wanted to call it, and wait 5 days until they could be touched again. And it was a difficult, challenging process. And so the fact that they're able to be in school and grab as many books as they want, and read as much as they want, is something that I hope continues and doesn't completely go away.
Yeah, at the high school, Jason shared, you know, some changes, like teachers being more flexible in terms of due dates. like thinking about students' social emotional well-being as well as their academic growth. I think that, that really, they put that at the forefront. Also, thinking about class time and using that time for an intense focus on productivity in class versus lots of homework. Nice. So that's another thing that was mentioned there. And they also mentioned the group work, saying that that was a challenge, but they tried to find ways to foster connections through brief or lightning round group work. So in 2 to 3 minutes in a pair share, whether it was in person or on Zoom, trying to do that. So different ways to foster that connection. But in terms of the response, Jason said, these students are amazing. Despite all the uncertainty, they really are a dedicated, respectful, and intelligent lot.
Yeah.
And he said early this year, there was some concern about some loss or weakness in writing, organization, and development. But as of our last department meeting, most feel the students are largely back on track. And of late, most of us note little difference in the skill, focus, or diligence from previous years. That's very reassuring to hear. So I think that is the end of our presentation. Thank you. Thank you to all of my colleagues.
Thank you. That was terrific and so good to hear your voices. And you covered so much ground. I'm actually not really sure where to begin. I guess I'll begin at the end, which is to say, even the reflections you've just shared on the opportunities and the challenges from last year, which might feel like really the rearview mirror to you, but it's so important for us to hear, and the hopefulness that you're offering with respect to some of the unexpected opportunities. I mean, really so poignant. And then to just sort of work, from 30,000 feet to comment on some of the messages that you are imparting to your students every day in what you're doing and how you're speaking with them about the opportunities reading provides, the importance of reading, the primacy of reading. I'm hearing, reading is preparing for life. Reading is how you get ready for life. It's how we end up with stand-up citizens who take action. We really could not feel more inspired by your connection to reading, your dedication to continuing to learn about the practice of teaching reading and literacy, fostering literacy, and the work that you're doing at every level. This was the first time in a while that we've been able to hear how the program has evolved and some of the highlights. And you've really given us just so much to feel proud of and to feel very grateful that our students are engaged in becoming lifelong readers at every step of the way. So thank you so very much. I imagine there are comments and questions, but really we appreciate the time and care that you clearly are taking every day to work with our children. And thank you for the time and care in preparing and organizing for this presentation. We really appreciate it. So I will pause and open up the floor for comments, questions. Please, Liz.
I wanted to say, I don't really have any questions, but it was such a great presentation to hear about the problem solving and identifying opportunities even during a very difficult time. And just to kind of hear and feel your enthusiasm for your subject, for your students, for books. I've always been a book person too. I mean, it's just really nice. And I feel like we've been in a place for the last 2 years where everything has felt off the rails and just out of kilter and everything like that. And I just have to say, it's so gratifying, like despite all of these challenges and all of the difficulties, to then be sitting here and feel like, even if everything feels kind of chaotic, the work is going on, and you're working with our students, and you're valuing them, and you're finding new ways to do things, and your resilience and problem-solving ability and just general enthusiasm and care for your students just really, really comes through. So thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I mean, maybe I'll just make a quick comment. I mean, it's always great to see any of the staff. It's so great to see you guys and sort of live in the classroom through you and to see those videos and even the little pictures. It's just so wonderful. We used to do it more, I think, but recently we haven't really had these opportunities, and it's really so nice to see real live teachers responsible for educating our students. So thank you so much. The presentation was fantastic. It covered so much and educated me a great deal, for which I'm very grateful. I get, it seems like there's some change in the air a little bit, like we've introduced Hegarty and there's some sort of new methodologies coming along. And I'm just curious, is that a challenge at all, or is that welcomed by both you as leaders and as the teachers in the various classrooms? Or how do you sort of move forward, I guess is what we're doing, but move forward with our literacy program? Is it easy for you as teachers, or is that a challenge? And, you know, how do you sort of deal with that?
It's probably a little bit of both. I think as teachers, you're always, we are readers and writers, so we're always learning something new when something comes out. We want to make sure that when the new research comes out and something is new or different, and that we're teaching the best we can for our students. So I feel like with the Hegarty, I think what we like about the Hegarty is the phonemic awareness was always a part of the kindergarten program, but I think we felt it needed more explicit teaching. And so when the Hegarty came out and we were talking about it and seeing it, it was like, oh, this is perfect. It kind of pulls together pieces that we were doing. And so, you know, when you get something new, it always takes a little bit of time. You have to learn it, and that there's always a learning curve. But I think when you see it and you see the children benefiting from it, you realize it's worth it.
Wonderful.
You know, and I think that's across not just reading and writing. It's how teachers are with everything as we begin to learn something new. So we want to do what's best for the students. So I got a little bit of both.
Thank you, Jackie. Thanks.
I'd like to thank you. It's also great to hear actual academic discussion and what students are actually learning. It's very impressive. You spoke about the books yellowing with age and giving out tablets and stuff. I had a flashback to my elementary school days when they wrote on stone tablets. And the books tended to be very short. I have sort of an oddball question. I noticed in an early slide there was lots of references to new standards, including a New York State set of standards. And I know in some professions, these standards are not always well received. You know, if New York State comes out with new medical standards about something, not everybody is jumping for joy and agrees with everything they say. Who makes these standards and how are they received? Because it seems like it's a state-by-state thing, which means it varies, and there's different ethos about the role of government in all of this. I was just curious about who are the people, are they known experts, and then how is this type of standardization received?
Yeah. I think NICED, you know, I mean, the Common Core obviously was something that all states had.
Right.
And then New York State in particular with different sets of standards. They've done it with, they've made their own version. So kind of based on that, the ELA, the math, and even the science, they have the New York State Science Learning Standards, which are the next-gen standards, but just a little bit different. And I think in a general way, what we've found with this new set of standards, and they are organized in a way that makes sense to us. So in terms of the teaching, it feels like a much better match than the original Common Core did. So I think in a general way, although there's always, you know, a variety of opinions with new standards, and I don't know exactly who's in the room all the time when these are adopted, but I do know that, you know, based on lots of research, which we know, you know, varies in the field, but I think there's wide agreement on, if you think about those big categories of foundational skills, literary text, informational text, of course these are the things, but it feels like a better match for our classrooms, I'd say, in terms of informing instruction.
Okay. Thank you.
Please, Alana.
I first wanted to say thank you for sharing the magic of the classroom with us and bringing that here. And your passion for it was felt. And I assume it's also felt with all the students there at the schools. And also for sharing about how you focus on the craft and the content of your teaching, and that it's a continual learning process, just as you're doing continual learning in the classroom about how to become a reader and a writer. And I also really appreciated hearing how technology use has changed, and you're using it as a tool and not the only way that you're teaching, but as an additive tool in the classroom. And that's really amazing to hear, and how it's expanding who you're including in the classroom. And I was wondering if there's anything more you need from the board, as we kind of like, or from administration or from parents, to kind of continue doing this great, thoughtful approach to thinking about your craft.
I can see the wheels turning.
You don't have to answer now. It could be a question for like, how much can we ask for?
It's interesting. I mean, I think all teachers probably, but I know the people sitting at this table, like, we so appreciate the board's support of enhancing libraries every year.
That's what I just said. I
And
think
books.
that's a huge piece.
Books.
Yeah.
And yes, now we have some, expanded digital collections, right? Because students, this is going to be a part of the way they read. So they have to learn to navigate those texts as well as the physical text they have in their hands. So I just want to say how much we have always appreciated that.
Definitely.
And continue to.
And all of the wonderful staff development that comes our way. All the new learning, and, it's so helpful to bring in the best practices to the classroom.
And having the opportunity to talk with colleagues and talk to one another and learn that, I think, is huge. Like, just spending time reading the literature and talking with one another, and then being able to reflect and say, all right, so how does this new information, how am I going to use it in my teaching and in my classroom? And being given time to be able to do that is wonderful.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is great.
As we're preparing for our next presentation, I'll just mention for anybody who's here and who perhaps would like to speak during public comment that we have a device at the back of the room by the circulation desk. If you wouldn't mind, please signing up. We're going to have this conversation related to COVID, and then one more presentation related to our facilities committee and its work, and then we will turn our attention to public comment. So thank you for your patience. All right, so I think now we're going to transition to 9.02, which is our opportunity to have a conversation about the impact of COVID on our schools, and we'll turn it over to you, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, Marjorie. So we're moving from the academic into the world of health and safety, the big transition. And since we haven't met for quite some time, we've come through a lot since we were last together as a board back in December. And living through what now we hope is beginning to look like the peak of Omicron. Perhaps we're now coming down on the other side of that. But for a period there was extremely difficult in the schools. The numbers of cases rising dramatically, and I know I've shared this with the board before. I continue to meet every Monday morning with Westchester County officials, and they give us updates every week on the case numbers in the county. So for that period of December into early January, those numbers were rising very, very, very rapidly across the county, and we saw it reflected here in the numbers we were reporting out in the district. We've much more recently thankfully, we see those numbers start to go down. And tonight, the number that we reported out was 3 positive cases across the whole district, which is the lowest number that we've reported in quite some time. And of course, we hope that trend continues for the health and well-being of all. So we're really hopeful that that's the trend and the direction in which we're moving. And while all that's been happening, the State Department of Health, the County Department of Health have been issuing revised guidance to us, which we have pushed out to the community. I'm just going to summarize it tonight very briefly to get us to where we are at the moment. But back on January 10th was the first time we received the most significantly revised guidance when the state reduced both the quarantine and the isolation periods from 10 days down to 5 days. And that had the impact, once that went into effect, of reducing the amount of time, obviously, students were out of school. And our focus, as we've said many times this year, has been on keeping the in-person experience as rich and vibrant, and you heard about it tonight, as we possibly could. It's been our goal throughout the year. So we are always happy when we're able to bring more students back into school. We saw that adjustment made, and then we saw further adjustments made more recently about the rules related to vaccinations and quarantines and status there, and we started to see more students be able to come into school even through the quarantine period. So most recently, as was mentioned earlier tonight, we did the distribution of tests on the weekend, and those tests now allow our district to have a test to stay program, which is allowing students who would otherwise be quarantined, if they choose, the unvaccinated asymptomatic students, if they choose to do the test to stay program, can also come into school. So what this has all meant is that at this point, essentially, the only students who are out of school are those who are either COVID positive or experiencing symptoms of COVID themselves at the moment. Those who have been exposed can now, for the most part, be in school, and this has made a very dramatic change for the lives of our administrators in particular, who at the peak of Omicron were truly doing nothing all day long but contact tracing and looking out for those close contacts and contacting families. This was another change, actually, I should mention this one, that the state made in the last several weeks. They ended their Department of Health's contact tracing procedures, so that as a district, we are no longer reporting those cases, those contacts, to the Department of Health, which was also something that took up an enormous amount of time, but was obviously very important to the ongoing challenge of overcoming the COVID experience. But that's no longer happening. So now we as a district are still, because we feel it's best practice, still contacting in those cases when there's been a COVID positive case in school. We are still contacting those close contacts, which in the case of schools means a student or a student who was within 3 feet of the positive case, whether that's in a classroom, on a bus. If it's an adult, it's still 6 feet. But that also has brought the numbers down significantly in terms of those who are required to quarantine. So we're seeing more of a return, I want to say normal, but somewhat to normal, far more students back in school, and as I mentioned before, fortunately with the numbers also still going down. I think I've mentioned most of the changes, and all of those details can be found on our website in the emails that we've pushed out. And if you want to get even more details, certainly you can go to the New York State Department of Health website, where there are charts and other things available for families and other citizens to be able to reference for themselves what the current rules and regulations are. The weekend was mentioned, the distribution of rapid test kits. We distributed about 650 test kits on the weekend, which was terrific. And at this point, if there are any families that did not collect test kits that would like to have them for their families, if you didn't pick them up on the weekend, just simply contact your school administrator and they'll be able to get them to you for your family. And I think that gets us pretty much up to this week. And I'll just say a few words about what happened at the beginning of this week. And I think for sake of clarification around the mask mandate, which was obviously the big discussion on Monday and Tuesday of this week, for sake of clarification, our authority and our obligation to implement the mask mandate throughout the pandemic has come either from the governor's office or from the New York State Department of Health. And I think that's true of all school districts in Westchester County. Again, the governor's office, the New York State Department of Health, throughout the pandemic, those orders have been in place. And then there was a brief window of time from Monday afternoon into Tuesday afternoon where that authority went away until an appeal was made on Tuesday afternoon and a stay was put in place, so that now that mandate is back in place. And that's honestly the long and the short of where that authority comes from. And that brings us to where we are today. So I don't know if there are questions from board members or anything I can try to answer or address for you.
Thank you for the overview and for bringing us up to date. We really appreciate that. Comments? Questions?
Have the administrators experienced a relief in that burden? Are they able to turn their attention now to?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. They certainly to some degree, but not entirely. Again, at the peak of Omicron, when contact tracing was still required, when we were still reporting all of those cases and the close contacts to the DOH, it was all day long, nights and weekends, all the time. That's not the case anymore, but still, as positive cases come in, every case does require us to try to figure out if the person was in school, where were those close contacts. It's not as extensive as it was before, but it's certainly still an important piece of the work each day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions before we turn our attention to our next topic? Thank you.
Sure.
All right, and this brings us to 9.03, which is our opportunity for some discussion and an update from our administration regarding the work of the Facilities Committee. I will just briefly note that we had skipped over our board subcommittee announcements, and I just want to check in and make sure that we're okay to continue proceeding in this order and then do subcommittees later. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Then I'm going to turn it over to Danelle, please.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was going to say. I think Liz will say a little bit more about our facilities committee when it comes to board committee reports.
Thank you.
But I'd first like to just acknowledge our operations and maintenance department. I think they've done a fantastic job throughout the years with small projects throughout our buildings. You may recall last spring, we performed our 5-year building condition survey. And that just gave us a great opportunity to really look at our facilities and create a committee that can really look at our schools through the lens of that 5-year building condition survey. And then how can we bring our school buildings up to a more suitable level to the learning that we're seeing today, the types of learning that we're seeing today. Our last major construction project was actually in 2003. We've had other smaller projects, AP Farms, we've done roof work, track and field work. So our operations maintenance department have been doing a lot of work to our buildings, but we really haven't seen any major projects since 2003 when we had to take out some bonds to perform those updates. So we're really looking forward to the facilities committee. I think it's a great opportunity. You'll see later on the agenda some facility committee members, community interest in it. So that's what I have.
Terrific. Thank you. Any questions or comments from board members about where we are?
I mean, I think it's worth repeating that it's been almost 20 years since we had any major facilities upgrades at any of the schools in the district. And they take a lot of wear and tear. And we recently had an opportunity to tour this building and the middle school. And there are clearly some areas that are in serious need of upgrading, facelifts. I'm thinking of the science labs and some of the STEP labs and some of the other areas around the schools that just need it. I mean, they just need it. So I think hopefully the facilities committee concurs that there's some substantial work to be done and we can start to move forward with some good progress, that our architects and the operations teams have really given us a great lens into what can be done. So I'm really very ambitious about what we may be able to achieve.
Does it feel appropriate? Can I just jump in now?
Yeah, please do. Please.
Just for continuity. Just to give you an update on the facilities committee report tonight, we will be appointing a bunch of community members. We had such great interest. We've got a wealth of talent, expertise, and enthusiasm around this particular committee, which is just really exciting. As Rory was saying, I mean, we're talking about buildings. I've learned some things about repointing brick that I didn't know about in the past. And so there's, you know, with projects like this, there's, you know, some very exciting potential things that we could do. And I think that we are fortunate to have such interest and expertise in the community. As Danelle mentioned, there was the 5-year building condition survey. There are 4 different categories of the types of upgrades that are recommended. None were category 1, which are life and safety upgrades. So, you know, that is also kudos to the operations and maintenance department that really keeps our buildings in such great shape. But then we did see some more exciting and, you know, bigger projects that could potentially be done and really enhance the education and learning atmosphere in our district. And I think that it's going to be a very exciting project. I know that I might be overwhelming with the optimism right now, but this feels like a very normal thing for a school board to be talking about, like, that has nothing to do with the pandemic. So I just want to say thank you to all of the community members who are going to be joining us at our next meeting next week, and we really look forward to this work.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the update, Liz. Thank you, Danelle. It is a really exciting opportunity, and we're fortunate to be meeting this opportunity after several years of dedicated work toward a learning commitment, so that we have a sense of what we're striving toward, who we're trying to become through the lens of our infrastructure. And we have an amazing group of administrators and teachers and staff members who will also be involved in this work, and community members who will participate, we hope, in focus groups. And we really do need participation from our entire community to make sure that we are striving toward the values and goals and aspirations of our community members with respect to what we want education to look like several years from now. You know, we won't be putting the shovel in the ground in the immediate future, but, you know, first we've got to prepare ourselves financially to be ready to meet these challenges. And, you know, it's very exciting, and thank you so much for leading the work. We look forward to appointing community members in just a short while. Any other comments or questions? Nope. Okay. Thank you. Terrific. So perhaps we will continue to postpone the remaining subcommittee reports until after public comment, because we have community members who've been with us for a while, and we want to be respectful of their time. So this is now our opportunity, 10.01, for public comment. We thank you again for your patience, and thank you for joining us. We ask that you please introduce yourselves and let us know if you have children in the district and perhaps where you live. We do take seriously our responsibility to listen attentively and respectfully during this portion of the meeting, so please don't feel disappointed or surprised if we don't respond or we don't engage in any back and forth. This really is the public's opportunity to comment on matters that you might have heard about tonight at our meeting or other matters pertaining to the school district. A little bit later in the meeting, we do have opportunity for dialogue, but again, even there, please don't feel disappointed if we don't engage immediately in a comment or concern that we hear tonight. We really do appreciate an opportunity to reflect on all that you've shared, to do any research that might be necessary, and certainly at a future board meeting, we can also always revisit a topic that might be brought to our attention this evening if tonight isn't the opportunity for us to immediately respond. So with that, let me turn my attention to the sign-up sheet. We do ask that you keep your remarks to 3 minutes, please. We have a timer that we will rely on. And just a reminder that we're all abiding by the code of conduct here this evening, and we appreciate your respectfulness in advance. The first speaker, to my knowledge, is Corey Stotesbury. If you don't mind joining us at the microphone. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you very much, everyone. My name is Corey Stotesbury, and I'm a parent in the district as well as a child psychiatrist serving students in the district and throughout New York. I'm also the co-author of a recently released toolkit called The Urgency of Normal. My ask today of the board would be to vote to ignore the state's mandate requiring any non-pharmacologic interventions in our school. Tonight, I hope to thread a needle and communicate that I'm not asking you to prohibit NPIs. If a family wants that for their child, they should have it. However, currently, that right of choice is only recognized in one direction. An increasing number of families feel that the lack of normalcy is a greater harm to their children than the risk of COVID. I won't cite the data regarding the lack of efficacy of masks and other NPIs, nor the plummeting risk of hospitalization and death for our children, as I know the board is beholden to their fiduciary responsibility to the district rather than data. And that fiduciary responsibility is largely defined by the rules of the state and the county. You likely have a risk management advisor that has told you that violating state rules will expose the district to litigation. Those rules are harming our kids, and the resulting litigation will probably fall on the state instead of because you have followed those rules, which I understand. However, the harms, including the loss of education and increasing mental illness, are something that we need to be thinking about more urgently. Instead, my appeal is to the part of us that led us all to work in careers involving children, that at some point we have to put our personal standards in front and decide to let those kick in and refuse to allow orders to harm our children. Orders that are increasingly being ruled in places as unconstitutional across the country. Our district has been very fortunate these past years. Our children have enjoyed a better school experience than most in Westchester County, and certainly than New York City. I haven't seen this officially, but watching our numbers, I assume that we've not had any super spreader events in our classrooms. Looking at the emerging data, it would seem that this has not been due to our mandating rules of NPIs, rather the static characteristics of our community. Low population density, higher than average income, higher than average personal health, and a higher than average employment in positions of non-customer facing jobs that allow people to work remotely. Omicron has shown us how pervasive airborne infections can be, regardless of NPIs. I do believe we're nearing the end of state mandates. But still, over the next few weeks, over 1 million people will descend upon Los Angeles to celebrate the Super Bowl and will not be engaging in any NPIs as long as they show a vaccine passport. Yet, not a mile away from the stadium, children there will wear a mask, indoors and outdoors, all day long in school, now being required to wear a surgical mask with a tight-fitting wire across the front. Every night, tens of thousands of people in New York City do the same thing, where they can enjoy any measure of enjoyment they want without any restrictions, as long as they can show such a passport. 14 states in the country are the only ones still maintaining school mandates. 66% of the counties in New York have decided not to enforce the governor's mask mandate in schools. And yet, when her mandate expires on February 1st for indoor facilities for adults and people outside of school, our children will wait 3 more weeks for that order to expire in schools. I feel that that's unethical and inappropriate at this point.
Mr. Stotesbury, I apologize for interrupting you. I just want to point out that the 3 minutes has elapsed. If you could please try
I'll
to
wrap up.
bring
Thank
to
you very much.
conclusion. Thank you.
It would make me very proud if our district sent a message to the state that the county that parents' rights over their children's well-being is not something we need permission to protect. Currently, our rules as parents have been stripped from us because of these rules. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Daniela Rapisardi-Petraro.
Good evening. My name is Daniela Rapisardi. My son is a first grader at Increase Miller. As you know, tomorrow the Second Department will hear the motion to stay the Nassau County Court order declaring mask regulations unlawful. If the Second Department lifts the temporary stay tomorrow, the decision to require face masks in schools will fall to individual school districts during the pendency of the appeal. I urge you to consider allowing families to have a choice as to whether their children should wear a mask in school. The mental, emotional, and social harm that we are doing to our children by forcing them to wear a mask in school is far worse than the risks of COVID. The pandemic started nearly 2 years ago. In those 2 years, there have been huge changes. One, a vaccine is available and our community has high vaccination rates. Two, there is medicine and treatment for COVID-19 widely available at our hospitals. And three, the virus has weakened. It is time to reassess whether extraordinary measures like masking our children are justified. At the present time, COVID poses very little threat of serious disease for students in highly vaccinated communities like this one. Teachers and other staff members can get vaccinated and a booster dose if they want to. Obviously, we're not forgetting about the vulnerable. There have always been illnesses such as RSV, the flu, pneumonia, that have affected certain people in a much more severe way than the general population. I have been in the shoes of parents with vulnerable children. My daughter had several life-saving brain surgeries postponed because she kept getting colds and ear infections. You can't undergo anesthesia while you're sick. I get that fear, but I never expected other people to change their behavior for her. Instead, I changed our family's behavior around the times of each of her surgeries. Similarly, here, there's a solution to protect the vulnerable. The most vulnerable can choose, if they want to wear a well-fitted N95 respirator. A properly fitted N95 is highly effective at protecting the wearer and does not rely on the behavior of others for protection. High-quality, one-way masking is more effective of protecting the vulnerable than universal use of extremely low-quality masks. This is what my son wears to school. He wears this Minecraft mask, and so do all the boys. It's little more than a fashion accessory. Forcing every child to wear this unregulated fabric over their face does not benefit anyone. Real-world studies and academic studies have not demonstrated any clear benefit of masking students. While the benefits of mask wearing to society are highly questionable, the damage that mask wearing is doing to our children is very real. Our children's mental health is suffering. Our children's development is being impaired. Our children can't see each other's faces. They can't learn social cues. Their teachers can't see their smiles. Their classmates can't see their frowns. Their speech is being affected. How can they learn to develop sounds when they're wearing masks? Their learning is being affected. My son wears glasses, and his mask always fogs up his glasses. How can he learn to read with foggy glasses? The literary presentation was awesome, but it's not going to help if he can't see anything. I asked my son today how he felt about wearing a mask to school, and he said he can't breathe in it. When he had COVID, he didn't even have a single symptom. And I get it. While sitting there, I feel like I'm suffocating in this mask. How can he learn? I wouldn't be here today if I didn't see a real change in my son that I know is from mask wearing. There are many parents here who see the horrible effect that mask wearing is having on their own children. Our children are our future. They deserve the highest priority in our society, especially because there's another, better way to protect the vulnerable. I truly hope the second department makes the right decision tomorrow and ultimately on the appeal. And of course, I hope that the Katona-Lewisboro School District makes the right decision for our children. Thank you.
Thank you. Daniela Goldman.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Daniela Goldman. I have 3 children in the school district, 2 at Meadow Pond and 1 at the middle school. I am here tonight to ask you that if and when the state mask mandate is removed, for you as a board member to accept the decision and remove the masks from our children. Our children have the lowest risk of COVID, yet they have been subjected to the most draconian measures. Our children are suffering for a disease that they are at low risk for. Adults' needs have been placed over our children. I would like to start off with some facts. This is comparing mortality rates in the U.S. for people under the age of 25 compared to COVID. For the age group of under 5, children are 11 times more likely to die in a car accident. They are 10 times more likely to die of homicide and 2 times more likely to die of a drug overdose. In the age group of 5 to 14, children are 10 times more likely to die of a car accident than COVID. They are 6.5 times more likely to die of suicide and 5 times more likely to die of homicide. In ages 5 to 24, they are 9 to 10 times across the board more likely to die in a car accident, suicide, homicide, or drug overdose. Out of approximately 72 million children in the U.S., as of yesterday, 883 children have died of COVID. Rate of COVID death under age 18 is 0.00001%. I will leave that up to you to determine if you think that is a big or small number. Joseph Allen, a professor at Harvard, a COVID and ventilation expert who has been a pro-mask advocate, recently went on CNN and spoke about the harm masks are causing in our kids. He states that the risk of COVID to kids have been consistently low throughout the pandemic. New data out of New York State reports that even during the peak of Omicron surge, the risk to an unvaccinated kid being hospitalized is 1 in 100,000. The risk of a vaccinated child being hospitalized is 2 to 3 per million. These rates are incredibly low. Vaccines have been readily available to the general public for over 10 months. Teachers and adults who want to be vaccinated and boosted have had ample time to do so. In a recent study reported by the CDC 2 weeks ago, it shows that even with a 2-dose vaccine regimen, your risk of a severe COVID outcome is 0.00003%. You heard me correct. That is 4 zeros in front of a 3. Vaccines work. We are underplaying the effect that vaccines have on this virus. Teachers and adults are protected. Children have been in masks for almost 2 years. To claim that they are resilient and no harm has been done is wrong. Children have suffered socially and academically. A recent study at Brown University shows significant cognitive and motor delay in children since the start of the pandemic. It is time to remove the mask mandate, and if our governor won't remove it, it is up to you and to fight for the local control of our schools. What happens when we are faced with another respiratory virus? Every year we have a wave of influenza or even a rhinovirus. Are we going to continue to mask our kids until they graduate? In response to people who say, what's the big deal? Just wear a mask. I politely say, please wear your mask and don't force it on everybody. I'm almost done. People who want to continue to wear a mask should take comfort in the fact that one-way masking works. One-way masking is where one person wears a mask and another person doesn't. Joseph Allen, the professor at Harvard, talked about it and was recently written in The Atlantic about the efficacy of one-way masking. Children are getting all the downside of wearing masks, hiding their faces, not being able to read facial expressions, and none of the upside. Unmask our kids. I am asking for you to fight for our children and take back control of our schools from policies that are driven from fear and not facts. Thank you.
Thank you. Violet Aniello.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Violet Aniello. I have 2 children in the district, one at Meadow Pond and one at John Jay Middle School. When COVID invaded our lives about 2 years ago, measures were taken to protect our communities. We are in year 3 of what some now are calling an endemic. We have more knowledge and data that shows that how the virus impacts the various age groups. Specifically, we know that the risk of dying from COVID is almost 0 for children, and that cloth masks are ineffective in stopping the spread of the virus. 2 years ago, we did not have any other treatments, so masks were the only thing that could really help us to stop the spread. Even Dr. Fauci told us in 2020 that masks are not needed and not as effective as people think. His statement may have changed over time, but science remains crystal clear on the effectiveness of cloth masks or lack of. We see that in our own community, with our children being masked all day, the virus continues to spread in and outside of the school environment. A very recent publication stated that face masks become non-consequential and do not function after 20 minutes due to saturations. Said this was from a professor, Yvonne Cossart, from the Department of Infectious Disease at the University of Sydney. When my kids get home, their masks are soaked, and I give them more than one. Masks are absurd, illogical, nonsensical, and potentially dangerous in trying to stop every case of COVID or stopping COVID at all costs. They may be partially effective in shielding adults from COVID. Since when is it ethical to burden children for the benefit of adults? Why are we harming one generation to protect the other? You have been put on the board to protect our kids, to help them become young adults and not stifle their learning and growth potential. I implore you to do what is right for our kids, especially make mask wearing optional. Respect all viewpoints. Those who want to wear a mask should have the same right as those who do not want to. Earlier this week, when I told my kids that they could go to school without a mask, They cheered, they were so happy. They said, "Mom, we're gonna be able to breathe again. We're gonna be able to see our friends." My husband had to be the one to tell them that was a short-lived situation. We now have treatments to help us against COVID. Let's use those tools that are better off and offer a better level of protection than masks. Although my kids missed the one day that they could go to school without a mask, I heard horrific accounts of teachers shaming kids who chose not to wear a mask in a classroom. That behavior is inexcusable, and I hope those teachers are going to be held accountable. Masks are going to go away. Neighboring districts around New York and around the country are making masks optional. Let's do the same here. You guys have the power. You guys are here to protect our kids. Lastly, why are we continuing to limit interaction between kids, whether in the classroom or during lunch or recess? It's a sad picture to see young, vibrant kids eating lunches on their lap and being spread out every 6 feet through the hallway. We can't stop the virus. We need to learn to live with it, just like we have done for the flu or any other communicable disease we have faced in the past. We should not continue using protocols that were implemented when we had no knowledge of the virus and we didn't have any other tools. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jake Kempen.
Sorry, one sec. Good evening, everyone. If you don't know, my name's Jake Kempen. I am a representative of the Saga Club, the Straight and Gay Alliance. Before I start, there's been a lot of talk about masking. I personally would really like to commend the board for maintaining masking guidelines and keeping us safe. That's just what I'm feeling. Want to get that out. All right. I come here to give some good news, some issues, and some not so good news. First, some good news. With the help from Mr. Selesnik and Vice Principal Mr. Bell, we have gained progress towards a more inclusive environment by ensuring that the gender-neutral bathrooms stay open. So I very much commend you for that. While this is great, there's still a few things that can be done. First of all, I've been addressed by over 54 students, which I had a petition. There's copies of it and stuff. The issue that was addressed to me was that the lack of feminine products in restrooms and in gender-neutral bathrooms. And on behalf of the student body and the Saga Club, we would like to request that all gender-neutral bathrooms and women's bathrooms be fully stocked with feminine products such as tampons and sanitary pads. This isn't really a want, this is a need. Currently, the only place where you can obtain feminine products is from the nurse, and while that's great, it's really not enough. So I would, on behalf of them, greatly request that all gender-neutral bathrooms and women's bathrooms and maybe even men's bathrooms be stocked with feminine products. All right, that's the first thing. The second thing is, prior to this meeting, but a few meetings ago, I had addressed to the board a need for a policy on the usage of all bathrooms regarding gender and that sort of thing. Currently, I met with Mr. Bell earlier today. Any trans kid can use any bathroom they identify, which is great. I love the inclusiveness. The issue is that there's still a lot of gray area in that. I'd like to propose that a bill that we have been drafting at the Saga Club, which basically just goes over everything the school is doing already, but putting a policy set in stone would be a very good idea because sorry, one sec. That would just be smart to have a policy in place. Yeah. And lastly, I formally invite any of the board members and to Mr. Selesnik to attend one of our saga meetings so we can all try to get on the same page with stuff. We're not asking for a lot. We just want the school to be as inclusive as possible. So yeah, to any board member, we totally welcome you to attend one of our meetings. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or any of the saga members. Please, we don't bite. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Kate.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle de Rivage.
So hard to speak through this. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Perfectly.
So good evening and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. There are two extreme views on mask wearing, both very passionate. I think it'll be obvious what my view is. So my name is Michelle de Rivage, and my children attended the Katona-Lewisboro District Schools. As a mother and educator, I am and have been saddened by the COVID policies the district has chosen to put into place for all of the district schools and compliance that both the district and parents have displayed. This practice is in violation of our medical freedom, and it is a parent's choice, not the school district's. There's so much damage being done to our children who are muzzled and prevented from seeing the faces and smiles of others, the facial expressions of emotions of their parents, their classmates, and school staff. This extremely serious issue should be understood through basic common sense, and this is wrong. There's not the slightest medical justification for any of this. The masking of children is hugely damaging to their physical health, their mental health, and well-being. It deprives them of oxygen. They're breathing in their own CO2, which creates an acidic environment and attracts disease. The children handled their masks constantly, creating unsanitary conditions. Their masks are full of spit and dirt. The deprivation of oxygen disrupts their ability to learn. In early childhood development, children need to see facial expressions in order to develop their minds and their character. They need physical interaction with each other and their teachers. Well, how can a child determine words that a teacher is enunciating when he or she can't see their faces? They need to see facial clues for learning. Nobody seems to have acknowledged or denied the fact that masks do not stem the spread of COVID-19, so that forcing children to wear them is an act of cruelty for which there is simply no excuse. There have been over a dozen randomized clinical trials regarding the wearing of face masks in respiratory viral infections, including one specifically aimed at COVID-19 cases. Not one lends any support to the current masking hysteria. There's no demonstrated statistically significant difference between wearing or not wearing face masks in public spaces during an outbreak of a respiratory virus in a single randomized clinical trial. Of course, if anyone who chooses to believe a mask will help is free to wear one. But the insistence on stifling entire schools full of children for no proven medical reason seems simply to instill panic, to undermine the ability to bond with one another and emphasize their social unimportance by covering their faces. Thank you for your earnestness and critical thinking in making the crucial decision regarding giving the option to parents to choose whether or not to participate in this practice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ashley Lamonic. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane.
Good evening.
Good evening.
That's too high. Good evening. My name is Ashley Lamonic. I live in Katona, and I have a daughter who's not yet old enough for the schools. I spoke at the last few board meetings as well. I was pleasantly surprised to read that Katona-Lewisboro was one of the districts that adhered to the court ruling earlier this week. I greatly appreciate that masks were optional for the day and understand that unfortunately mask mandates are once again enforced at Katona-Lewisboro. Many parents and prospective parents in the districts sincerely hope that the district opts for lifting current mandates and avoiding any new ones. This should be done as soon as possible. I know this is not an easy issue. There are people passionate about this on both sides. I also understand that students were taken aback by the sudden change on Tuesday. This is all the more reason for the school district to be proactive in lifting mandates as soon as possible on their own terms, so that families, teachers, and administration can help students transition back to the normal ways of being in school. I'm sure I'm not the only one who has heard about the negative impact of COVID protocols in schools in general, but I will focus on the impacts in this district. While my daughter is not old enough for elementary school, I've heard from multiple neighbors with young kids that their children have experienced both stagnant academic growth, as in like no growth, same reading levels year to year, and sharp declines in self-confidence. For one family, their polite, shy 5-year-old didn't ask for help when he didn't understand something because teachers had trouble understanding him through his mask, and he hated to repeat himself. It got bad enough that he was waking up in the middle of the night with panic attacks, a 5-year-old. His parents, even with 3 other children, have since chosen to homeschool their kids rather than subject their child to the emotional distress caused by these mandates. Once upon a time, not too long ago, it was beyond normal for kids to go to school, see their friends and teachers' faces, interact with their peers, sit next to and socialize with their friends. As adults, the last 2 years have been completely unprecedented in our lives, and now we have a generation growing up thinking this is normal. It is not. This is especially concerning for young kids. We're going on 2 years of this, and for young kids, this is all they know. The longer it goes on, the more damage is done to this generation. These were meant to be temporary measures. It is time. Let parents be the ones to decide what is best for their children. Thank you.
Thank you. Meredith Black.
Good evening.
Good evening.
First, I wanted to take a moment to thank Ms. Mary Ford for preparing the literacy presentation and providing a copy for publication on the BOE website in advance of this evening's presentation, so as to give the board and the public an opportunity to review and consider the developments that are being made with respect to literacy in our schools. So much of tonight's presentation highlighted important elements and steps in fostering the development of strong readers, and I hope this presentation is indicative of a move away from antiquated and damaging reading strategies that have long informed and infused classroom instruction. With that said, what I remain curious about is the implementation of these concepts. Have our teachers received training on these reading pillars? By whom and with what frequency? Do they truly understand what these pillars are, how they tie together, how to reach these pillars, and how to identify and assist children that do not readily grasp these concepts? Have our teachers received any training on transitioning away from antiquated and damaging reading strategies to scientifically proven and supported methods of reading instruction? I was happy to hear and learn about the conversation that has started with the reading of the Shifting the Balance. But I still remain particularly concerned with this, as the district's December 2021 response to my FOIL request indicated that the district continues to use Teachers College study in both reading and writing, and it's long been shown that these programs continue to include and guide students to use MSV to inform their decoding. Such tools have been proven to be inconsistent and detrimental to readers. So if the district is going to refuse to step away from these programs, what is being done to educate our teachers on the portions of those programs and teacher manuals that direct them to use these tools in their lessons? My understanding from other literacy experts is that in such instances, teacher training and education is needed to inform teachers why such strategies are antiquated and harmful, and educate them on proper alternatives and instruction to provide. One highly regarded program for such transitioning is LETTERS. Has the district considered investing in LETTERS training for its teachers? What type of ongoing training is made available to our teachers to keep them abreast of the scientific research of reading? Have our teachers and administrators received any training in learning disabilities that affect a child's ability to read? not only so that they can understand why a child is struggling and how they can help them, but to also enable them to have empathy for the challenges those children face in a classroom. As a parent of 2 dyslexic children, I can attest to the fact that even knowing what my kids struggle with, participating in a Dyslexia 4-day seminar entirely changed my perspective and understanding of not only what their disability might feel like, but how it has the ability to impact the way they engage in classroom activities, participate with their teachers, and problem solve. I can honestly say I would not have had the same understanding or empathy I do today without that seminar, which, by the way, took 2 hours. It was free, and it was done by the Putnam County BOCES group. Besides trainings, are our teachers being observed in the classroom by program trainers to ensure that the implementation of these scripted programs is being done properly? What type of literacy program and support is being provided to middle school and high school students that are struggling to learn to read? Because just as a child finishes 3rd grade or graduates from 5th grade, it doesn't mean that they're a fluent or capable reader. And in fact, children with dyslexia and other learning disabilities continue to need additional instruction in reading and the elements of reading into their teenage and adult years. It's a lifelong process. So simply saying you're making text available or providing support is not enough. They actually need that reading instruction. And lastly, what type of credentials do teachers providing RTI in reading or specialized reading instruction have? Would the board consider making such qualifications a requirement for individuals fulfilling these roles? Thank you. I look forward to hearing more about literacy in the school district. Thanks.
Thank you. Adelaide Black.
Hi, my name is Addie Black. I'm in 5th grade and I'm dyslexic. I've been attending Windward for 3 years. I am not here to make a fancy speech, but I want to ask you a few questions. Why am I here at Windward and not at KES? Why is it taking so long to respond to parents' concerns about reading? When are you going to make a change needing so that students like me can return to schools with my friends? Why am I being treated differently? Why, when dyslexia is it so common? Thank you.
Thank you. Erica Glick.
Good evening. I'm Erica Glick. Thank you for providing the slides in advance of this evening's presentation. I know when I've requested them in advance in past years, that request has been denied, so thank you. This was very helpful. I tonight went immediately to the references. As a parent, a professional, and someone incredibly interested in reading and literacy, I think it was worthwhile to be familiar with what you were basing your information on. First, I noticed your first reference was that of Shifting the Balance, your summer book club reading. While I can appreciate that you were interested in the 6 ways to bring the science of reading into a balanced literacy classroom, this reminded me an awful lot of spin. One could be hopeful that you're attempting to build bridges, but aren't you just spinning the science lingo into these conversations, perhaps to placate those with questions? I'd like to know what research there is that this idea of blending poor methods with real science is better than real science. Why would one do that? These products, balanced literacy, leveled literacy, and poor professional developments, are unfit for the intended use of teaching foundational reading in a scientific, explicit, and systematic way, period. I'd like to see a study on how this works effectively, that is, adapting poor products to use the science. But unfortunately, no such study exists. The next reference was something from the International Literacy Association. One could observe that ILA board members are derived from a variety of camps. Whether you see that to be problematic or perhaps not, I read everything from them with a bit of skepticism. They were quoted regarding the benefits of independent reading. While independent reading does in fact have benefits, it's most appropriate for readers who are already fluent. Otherwise, a complete waste of time, and time that can actually be better spent teaching. Your next quote from Dr. Allington, the retired professor, famous dyslexia denier, whole language supporter, former president of the ILA, who threatened to shoot whoever wrote the Say Dyslexia bill, which was simply a bill asking for universal screening a few years ago, and again denies the existence of dyslexia, needless to say, rightfully skeptical of anything he says. And the ILA, as they chose to never stand against his hateful narrative, I hesitate towards throwing them my support either. Moving along to your information from the NCTE, National Council of Teachers of English, again, largely whole language supporters, again on independent reading, more time for the struggling reader to learn how to fake it. In fact, this was also discussed by the NICHD, the report of the National Reading Panel that you cited. From their extensive report, independent silent reading with minimal guidance and feedback, not surprising, they were unable to find a positive relationship for reading achievement. One could feel some of these references were cherry-picked, but when one truly looks past the buzzwords and spin, I'm finishing up, it's sadly empty and simply wrong. Similar to the overall presentation, full of buzzwords, to the unfamiliar listener, probably sounds impressive. But to those in the know, we can see through it. I also find it curious that there was no mention of Teachers College Readers and Writers Workshop tonight, other than the intervention method. That's a rather large pink elephant in the classroom that we're not speaking about. Are we still using it? It would be wonderful if all stakeholders in Katona-Lewisboro could come together and share at the table, share their truths, listen together, non-judgmentally and collaboratively problem solve. If this table existed, I'd eagerly pull up a chair. But sadly, while we could be working together through a literacy committee, sharing all of our hard-earned knowledge, we continue to limit ourselves, our district, and ultimately our children. I again ask for a literacy committee. Let's do better for all of the children. Thank you.
Thank you. Jacqueline Klein-Novak.
Good evening. I am a parent, a resident, a speech-language pathologist, special educator, and reading specialist. Oh, forgot my name, Jacqueline Klein-Novak. I would like to know when there will be a response about the concerns regarding the special ed program. It's been many months and about 100 speeches by residents concerned about the abuse and mistreatment of autistic children in this district. I wrote an email to you, Mrs. Schiff, after our December meeting. I didn't get a response. And I frankly just want to know when we will get an update about the changes to improve behavior management. When will we get an update about changes to safeguard our most vulnerable students? Please address this. When? Dr. Alkmaar's visit was disappointing. Not a thorough assessment of the program. I don't know really, it wasn't so clearly communicated to us what it was supposed to be, what the goal of his visit was. But it certainly wasn't a thorough assessment of the special ed programs. Did he review the children's IEPs or specific goals before he observed? And if not, how could he have known that the lessons were appropriate? I just don't understand that. Did teachers relate challenging behaviors that they were dealing with? Did he help interpret negative behaviors or how to interpret negative behaviors? Did he help with behavior management techniques? Did he speak about setting appropriate goals, academic, social, and behavioral? I didn't hear any of this on Dr. Volkmar's Zoom. As a special educator and former teacher, this is what I'd want to know from an expert. I didn't hear any of this. We need a real review of our programs, in-depth and thorough, and Dr. Volkmar's visit wasn't it. And I'm really just wanting a response at some point of when will we know about any sort of updates about this. About the literacy program, I find it was a beautiful presentation, and I appreciate what went into it and the enthusiasm for it. The problem is it doesn't work for all. and that's the problem. It is estimated that 20% of the population is dyslexic. 20% of the kids at the school are dyslexic to varying degrees. So Hegarty, that sounds like a nice addition. Foundations K to 3 could be problematic because it needs to be delivered with a certain intensity, a certain consistency, a certain fidelity to the program that I don't think is really happening. I'm going to go a little quickly now. Do we stop teaching decoding after 3rd grade? Wordly Wise, I'm very familiar with. I use it. It's not a phonics program. It's a vocabulary program. It doesn't teach structure in any kind of direct, systematic way. It's about vocabulary. It does a nice job of that. I had the opportunity, I was at the Christmas Crafts Fair in Katona in December, in the commuter lot in Katona, and it was a wonderful school community event. Then I was reminded that 23 Katona-Lewisboro kids are not part of the school community because they are waiting in that commuter lot every morning to take a bus to Windward, which is unbelievable. This is 1st through 8th grade. We have 23 kids going to Windward. I don't know how many are going to Eagle Hill. I'm not sure. I don't know how many are going to Winston Prep, but I do know there's about 23 kids that are getting on a bus in the morning from that commuter lot so that they can learn how to read. If our reading program was effective, these Katona-Lewisboro kids would be in district and part of their school community, like Addie so bravely just talked about. I'm not even including the struggling readers that my colleagues and I in the private sector work with at 7:45 a.m. in the morning or late in the evening. We must do a better job. We can. It starts with a willingness to look at it, a willingness to be open to the research and the science, a willingness to be motivated and driven to have all kids receive what they need to learn to read in district. Let's come together. Let's discuss how this can occur. Can we form a literacy committee? It's never too late to do that. So that all the kids, including those 20% with varying degrees of reading disability, can have their needs met. Thank you.
Thank you. Is anybody else waiting to speak? Not aware. Yes, please.
Thanks, Ms. Schiff. I wasn't planning to speak, but I feel compelled to. My name's Matthew Golia. Happy New Year. I know there hasn't been a public meeting all year. The last one was canceled abruptly. I'm wondering if you can comment about what happened there. Trustee Garrity, you seemed so giddy about the facilities committee, and you talked about the wealth of knowledge that the public had and how excited you were to work with folks, which I admire your positivity, but I feel like it's a bit of a slap in the face for some of the ladies behind me who have been asking for a literacy committee for 2-3 years. We have a facilities committee, an IMES space committee, an equity and justice committee. Why can't we have a literacy committee? Why can't we have a special education committee? Mr. Burke, nice to see you. Haven't seen you in 2 months. I emailed you regarding your comments on November 4th. I have the same questions for you. You said you didn't believe we understood how much the Board of Education cared about the students, the vulnerable students, and how active you were and how many steps you have taken to address our concerns. So my question to you, can you tell us specifically what those steps and actions have been? Thank you, that's it.
Thank you. Is anybody else waiting before we close the public forum for tonight? Okay, thank you so much for members of the community for joining us, and thank you for your comments, concerns, and for taking the time to speak with us. We appreciate it. I'm going to suggest a brief recess. It's 10:10. I'd like to make a motion for a brief recess. Board members have been sitting at the table, administrators, for over 2 hours, And I think just a brief bio break might be called for. Thank you for seconding the motion, Ilana. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. And we will reconvene at 10:15. Thank you.
Oh, let's wait for Mary's.
Sure, yeah, I was going to say a couple things. Okay, great. Thank you so much, everybody. I think we're ready to come back into public session. If I could ask for a motion, please. Thank you, Julia. Seconded by Liz. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Terrific. So I think let's go back up in our order of business to 7.01, which is our opportunity for board subcommittee reports. Thank you, Liz, for reporting out on the facilities committee. Was there anything for audit tonight?
Not tonight.
Okie doke, great. And how about from finance?
Sure. The Finance Committee met earlier this week, and we had a very productive meeting in the district office. Most members were able to participate. We had one person dial in via Zoom because she was in Florida. It's coming together, so we're feeling good about our charge, which essentially is to reevaluate the forecasting model and get an understanding of what the revenue and expenditure streams of the district will look like over the course of the next 4 years. So a little bit of predictive modeling going on. We're also planning to review our expenditures comparatively to our peer districts. And then hopefully with that information as insights, identify areas where there may be opportunities to realize savings or to do things a little more efficiently than we are. It's still a work in progress. Donnell and the district office have been super helpful in pulling data for us. And we have some really wonderful committee members this year who are adding enormous value to the way in which we're thinking about it, as well as some old committee members. So I think it's going along well. We're preparing to report out in June, and I think we're on track. A couple of people have some homework to do, but I think we're on track and things are going well.
Wonderful. That's great to hear. Thank you very much. Parent council.
We met at the beginning of this year, and we had the gift of Andrew sort of framing our discussion apropos of tonight with some articles about COVID and the difficulty of the past month in particular, where there was sort of, we were heading toward the peak of this current surge and how it was difficult to make decisions in that moment, and that there kind of may not be a right and a wrong around, particularly around the question of school opening and how schools opened again. And this was sort of, in January, and look how different, it's sort of a different discussion, yet some of those same questions are still there. So that kind of framed, we had a very good discussion at the parent council, and then there were a number of questions that got answered, but a lot was around COVID during parent council at the first meeting of the month.
Thank you. Sounds like a great discussion. Thank you. Sustainability Committee did meet in early January, and Mary was able to update our committee on the great work that is newly underway thanks to the curriculum integration leaders for sustainability and also the work of the Sustainability in Our Schools Committee. Several of us had attended a Climate Change Institute last year, you might remember, and Mary was actually able to arrange for a consultant that we met there to meet with our committee, the school committee that is, not the subcommittee, to share a framework for sustainability education and to help the district think about how we can use our own buildings as teaching tools. There's going to be a follow-up to that later this month in preparation for that committee's next meeting in February. And in addition, small groups of teachers in partnership with a consultant are developing units of study that are aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, as well as discipline-specific standards and dispositions related to the learning commitment. We also returned our attention to electric vehicle infrastructure through the lens of Governor Hochul's State of the State, which had just occurred right before our subcommittee meeting. And in her address, she proposed legislation to require that by 2027, all new school bus purchases will be zero emissions, and that by 2035, all school buses on the road will be zero emissions. Today, several of us had the opportunity to attend a webinar hosted by a group not affiliated with Katona-Lewisboro proper, but it was a panel discussion on many various perspectives and elements related both to funding and implementation of electric vehicle infrastructure in the region. Importantly, the passage of legislation that was referenced by the governor would ensure that the state provides some aid toward this infrastructure, which can be quite costly. And Danelle and Paul Christensen have continued to work on the project that I mentioned at the last meeting is already underway with regard to moving forward for some EV infrastructure at the middle school and high school John Jay campus. Finally, we discussed opportunities to apply for state or national level recognition of the great work to reduce our greenhouse gas footprint that's been underway for years. It's just about time that we apply for some of the official recognition that we think we're eligible for, and we're going to be exploring this in greater detail in the spring. And then with regard to Westchester Putnam School Board Association, there was a regional symposium last week, and Ted Dintersmith was the featured guest speaker. He's a venture capitalist turned entrepreneur / leading advocate for education policies that foster creativity, innovation, motivation, and purpose. You might know him as the funder and executive producer of the film Most Likely to Succeed, which was very popular several years ago and had a little bit of a following. Very interesting talk, very well received. And next week, WestPut is hosting its annual Superintendent Westchester County Putnam School Board Legislative Forum on February 3rd, 7 to 9 p.m. I think that's it for subcommittee reports, unless there are any comments or questions.
In terms of infrastructure, you mean like all the, where you get the electricity from and the chargers?
It's really exciting, and of course Danelle can say more than I can, but we are underway in, not yet shovel in the ground because we've got to wait for the ground to thaw and spring is a better time, but the plans are really being buttoned up so that we can move ahead with EV charging infrastructure on the John Jay campus right now. There could be plans in the future for the elementary schools as well, and this would be for commuter vehicles and small transportation fleet type vehicles, a minibus, for example. And this is, a pilot and sort of taking a step forward with an eye toward future opportunities, and really also waiting for the market to adjust with respect to, making this all a reasonable cost-benefit proposition for a school district, and eagerly awaiting some connecting of the dots between the governor's vision for where we're headed with EV fleets and, where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, in terms of a community's ability to afford it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
When we were giving out test kits, what I took away from it was electric cars are here to stay. There was a significant percentage that were electric cars. So it's sort of the catch-22 of you need the facilities to make the cars practical, but if there's not a lot of cars, the facilities are hard to justify. So it seems like we're over that hump to some degree because the people are out there driving it. I would imagine in a given community, the school buses in total add up to a lot of emissions. In terms of big vehicles on the road every day going lots of distances, that would be a significant thing to achieve. Would be to change the fleet.
It is really interesting to think about, and what you've said certainly is true. Thinking back to our presentation, the Sustainability Subcommittee's presentation last spring, however, what we know is that it's actually our building infrastructure that really is the greater culprit percentage-wise. So although we need to be going out after this on all fronts all the time through a financially responsible lens, there's even greater gains. There are even greater gains to be had with respect to the buildings than there are actually with emissions from the fleet. But that being said, we're looking at all fronts and also looking at how to raise awareness among our students and our population of responsible decision-making on behalf of the planet and the people we serve.
Gotta get that generation like out soon,
Yeah.
making decisions and being in positions of power as soon as possible.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, so then that brings us to our consent agenda, 11.01. And I don't think we have items that we need to pull out to vote on separately. I know we have a couple of things that we want to pause for some brief comment or discussion. But if we're not voting separately on any items, would anybody like to move the agenda? Thank you,
So moved.
Julia. Seconded by Jill. Thank you. And then let's just pause. Andrew, I think you had a couple of comments that you wanted to make first, please.
Sure. There's a few personnel matters that we want to pull out and comment on tonight's agenda. The first being a congratulatory matter, which is our Director of Technology, Mr. Chris Nelson, is being recommended for tenure tonight. It feels like Chris has been with us forever. That's probably pandemic related. But it also feels that way because he's made enormous strides in the district, really, truly. When we think about how well all this technology infrastructure works, it's really thanks to Chris. And when we think about getting through the pandemic also, he helped us enormously in the distribution of all these devices. I mean, we really leapt ahead in ways we weren't anticipating in terms of the scale and the scope of the technology infrastructure in our district. So we're really thrilled to be recommending Chris to the board tonight. He's, in addition to what I just said, an enormously dedicated employee who can often be found here late at night, even when you need a last-minute fix of some technological issue. He seems to always be around, so we really appreciate that. Another appointment that's on the agenda tonight, which is a more unexpected one, but also one that we're very grateful for, is the appointment of Mr. Quan Stanbow as the acting principal at Katona Elementary School. As we know, Christy Harris is out on a leave at the moment, and Quan has really stepped up in challenging times to lead that building, and we really both appreciate that, but also want to acknowledge appropriately the work that he's doing, and that's why we're moving him into this position with the board's permission of acting principal, and then as soon as that's happening, know that we're also looking to backfill his position, and we hope very soon to be recommending an acting assistant principal so that the building has the necessary administrative support for the rest of this year, or for as long as Christie's leave should continue. We don't know exactly how long that will be. After that, a couple more items. On the other end of the spectrum, we have some retirements on the agenda. We do a much bigger celebration of all our retirees in the spring, so I'm not going to go into great detail tonight, but it would be wrong not to say something. So, because all these folks have had lengthy careers here, we want to congratulate two assistant principals, Mr. Vinny Bell here at the high school, you heard his name mentioned earlier, and Ms. Dawn Pomeroy over at Meadow Pond. Both have announced their retirements effective at the end of this school year, so we congratulate both of them and wish them well. And we also have 4 teachers tonight who similarly have announced their retirements at the end of the year. That's Deirdre Parkhurst at Katona Elementary School, Jim Egler, a math teacher at the middle school and the high school, Stuart Shippey, a high school science teacher, and Jeff Tepper, a middle school counselor. And all of these folks have had really lengthy and outstanding careers here in the district, so we want to just acknowledge and say how much we appreciate all of their years of service and congratulate them, and there'll be a more complete recognition of their careers in the spring. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Andrew. We really appreciate those kind words, and we want to underscore your gratitude and celebration of Chris Nelson on the occasion of his being appointed tenure this evening, and also thank you to Quan Stanbow, and we're very grateful for his willingness and ability to step in to this role. And we are, of course, wishing our retirees all of the very best in their retirements, but we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that they leave behind quite a legacy. That's, quite a lot of history and expertise, subject matter expertise, institutional knowledge, and so we thank you for calling that out, and we will miss them, and we look forward to celebrating them properly at the end of the year. I'll also just briefly underscore Liz's comments earlier. We are about to appoint, I think it's 11 community members to the Facilities Committee. We're really excited about their expertise, their willingness to lend their talents and their time, and also that they represent an amazing cross-section of the district. And so we're very grateful for their willingness to join us in that work. And I'll pause in case there is any further comment or question about the consent agenda. If not, we can vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, 7-0. Okay, this brings us to an opportunity to recognize a few gifts and donations. We're at 16.01, and it's my pleasure to make a motion to approve these gifts. If I can have a second, please. Thank you, Rory. So tonight we have 3 gifts. We have from the KL Foundation, a gift in the amount of $1,950, which is going towards O&M for maintenance of the Forever Molly and Gregory sundial. We're really grateful for that donation so that we can maintain the sundial, and thank you very much to the KL Foundation for honoring that memory. Also a gift from the Lewis and Ann Abrams Foundation. This is $5,000 for the John Jay High School. Thank you very much for that generous donation. And finally, from the town of Lewisboro for a donation of 600 KN95 masks valued at $1,092, excuse me. And we very much appreciate that generous donation. I think we can vote on the resolution. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you so much. And this brings us to 17.01, which is an opportunity for board dialogue and discussion. It has been a while since the board last met, but we did think that it might be worth reflecting back on a couple of comments and questions that were raised back in December when we last met in public comment. Maybe I'll start by mentioning or reminding the board we had one community member who inquired as to whether we were aware of the framework provided by New York State for social emotional learning. And I think this bears repeating for our governance team and for our entire community, because we are so focused at this moment on the social emotional health of all of our students and our staff. And we thought it would be helpful to remind the board and the community that, in fact, we had a presentation here at the board table. I think it was January of 2020, back when we were able to do conversations in 2 parts. And it was a wonderful presentation. So yes, absolutely, we're aware of that framework. I'd love to invite you, Mary, to say a few words if there's something you'd like to add. I know already in tonight's presentation, you did embed reference to the social emotional framework and perhaps new benchmarks. And if you wanted to just even repeat what you shared earlier, I think it bears repeating because that work is so pressing at the moment, if you don't mind.
And as you know, that's one of our focus areas for this year, but it's been a focus for quite some time. And we do base our work around New York State's framework, which is actually based on the CASEL framework, the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. You've probably seen that CASEL wheel. It has 5 competencies. 2 of them are related to self-awareness, 2 related to interpersonal skills, and 1 related to responsible decision-making. And so the New York State framework is also based around those 5 competencies, and they've actually created some benchmarks, which are really helpful for teachers to see. So one of the things we've done, we have a curriculum unit blueprint to help teachers design units of study. And alongside that, looking at your core disciplinary standards. So you might look, let's say you're designing an ELA unit, right? You'd look at the next generation ELA standards. But alongside that, think about those social emotional competencies and which ones you can build in. So it's just kind of thinking about how we embed it into everything we do. So things like partnership work, where students have to think about their interpersonal skills and how you maybe agree to disagree, or just connect with others, and taking turns speaking at the lowest levels. Those kinds of things are really important. But the self-management piece, that's another big one that we work on throughout the grades. But the benchmarks are really helpful in thinking about what that looks like in a first grader versus a second grader, and it kind of takes it up through the grade. So they're all really helpful resources from New York State, and particularly from CASEL, but they are actually interconnected right now. CASEL seems to be the preeminent source for many of those materials.
Thank you.
Marjorie, do you have the actual dates of that, just in case if anyone in the community is watching, they can go back and watch
Sure,
those
yeah, I'd be
videos? It
happy
was
to share the
January.
dates. Yes, it was January 9th and January 23rd of
familiar.
2020.
Great.
Yeah, it was one of our final two-part presentations before the pandemic. So January 9th, January 23rd, about 2 years ago, a two-part conversation dedicated to SEL. Thank you, Mary.
Mary, sorry, Marjorie,
please.
just real quick on that. But when we reach out to the state, or when the state provides a framework like they do for SEL, which is obviously a very valuable tool and resource, are we left to our own devices to interpret that framework, or do they provide sort of training resources for us to? Is there somebody you can call to say, "Hey, help me walk me through this," or I'm just wondering how that sort of process works.
Not at New York State, although I have to say that in the case of social emotional learning, there are lots of really valuable resources that they have provided. But we really look to CASEL. We have our own, it's more of a lens. For example, at the elementary level, we have a program called Second Step that teaches many of the social emotional skills directly, but looking at that in the context of those benchmarks, like which ones are they helping us to reach, which lessons are connected to those. So the state isn't giving us the how, so there is some degree of interpretation, but they do give us many examples, like they have a crosswalk document that was really helpful, different school districts that have shared what they've done, like in a science unit, for example, and how you might work on social emotional learning competencies within a science lesson. Like that.
But there's a reasonable amount of work on the district's part to interpret and implement those types of guidelines.
Yeah.
But that's helpful.
Yeah. We actually had yesterday, we have a social emotional wellness committee that meets, and so groups of teachers met yesterday around that, thinking about, the curriculum, interventions, and then just the school climate piece. Yeah, that's a really important part of it. It's the context for our social emotional wellness. We want students to come to school feeling welcomed and affirmed, which is also connected to the culturally responsive piece. So they all are very much interconnected. But those are the three areas that our group is focusing on this year.
Thank you. And just one other topic that we thought might be worth revisiting. We heard some concern from a few community members, if I remember correctly, around the notion that maybe the board wasn't aware that ESY is part of a requirement as a result of IDEA legislation, and I did think it was worth clarifying and maybe also discussing in the context of upcoming budget deliberations that absolutely, we're well aware of the requirement to provide the program, but with respect to advocating to the state back when the executive budget was recommended to be modified and the district was in a position to be filling a $385,000 shortfall. We certainly understand that, of course, we would always maintain our program and maintain it with the integrity and care that is the hallmark of our every program. But from our perspective as fiduciaries, we really only have two sources of revenue, state aid and property taxes. So in our role as trustees, we are also always looking to ensure that the state is upholding its end of the bargain. And also advocating for public school children everywhere. And although we stood to lose $385,000 in that moment, other neighboring districts, stood to lose much greater sums of money. And we may be in a position to make up that shortfall by adding to the tax levy or modifying other programs, but that's not always the case in neighboring districts. And so actually this was an act of solidarity on the part of approximately 13 school districts in the greater Westchester-Putnam County region, and it worked. And the executive budget was modified, and all of our school districts maintained that state aid for that program. So that was really the upshot of the advocacy. I think we also separately heard some concerns about the duration of our ESY school day, which were new concerns. And I thought it might also just be worth, checking in with the administration regarding your perspective on that.
So if we remember, there were questions about a 3-hour program versus a 6-hour program, and it was noted that there are some neighboring districts that have 6-hour programs. There are, in fact, 2 different lengths of program that can be applied for in the summer, a 3 or a 6-hour. And up until a couple of years ago, our 3-hour morning program was always followed by an afternoon program that was run in conjunction with SEPTO. It was more of a camp-like experience that families actually seem to enjoy and appreciate the academic component in the morning, more of the camp-like or field trip type experience in the afternoon. The challenges around running if the school runs a 6-hour program, it's 6 hours of academics, which in our experience is not something that all families necessarily want in that program. And also there are challenges around staffing a program like that in the summer. We rely on our own staff. We know that we have enough staff for a 3-hour morning program who are willing to do it. We don't know that we would necessarily, or it'd be more challenging for a 6-hour. But I'm happy to say that most recently, Catherine McNulty is back in conversation with SEPTO, who've expressed interest newly about perhaps coming back to that afternoon portion. So I don't want to get ahead of ourselves because I think they're just beginning that conversation, but it may be that we'll be seeing a return to what was a few years ago.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks for the update. If there are any questions or comments on either of those 2 topics, we can certainly pause here, or if board members had other topics or comments for board dialogue, turn the floor over to you. Thank you. Please.
This is I know, Marjorie, we don't always comment on what's been said at the current meeting, but it feels hard not to give a little attention to kind of what came into the room and also in the context of this week of what happened. And here tonight, we heard a lot of concern or questions around masking, and particularly around the authority of the board. And so a quick clarifying question, which I think was already said earlier, that the way that the mask mandate is currently in place is because of the state mandate, and that our board is not making, first of all, when there's a state mandate, there's nothing the board can do. We have to follow the regulations of the state, right?
Correct.
And
Yeah.
if that were to go away, then we would discuss what options were in place. Right? Then maybe maybe the board would have authority or not, or maybe it'd be a superintendent decision.
There's question as to whether or not we have local authority to impose a mandate. I think that's the most I could say at this point.
Yeah, I would agree that I think this is one of those if-then propositions, and fortunately tonight we're not in the position to have to cross the if bridge. I think it is an open question as to what happens if there is not a mandate, and if the authority upon which we have relied up to this point is no longer constitutional, simply stated, then we have another set of questions on our hands, is how I understand it at the moment. Although it is, I think, important to say, we do have community members who seem under the impression that we have a certain authority, and I understand people have their information and their perspectives, but we are well educated and well advised. And for the time being, I think it would be prudent to not wade into exceeding our authority, potentially. But I think you ask a great question, or you hint at a great question.
Yeah, and that's helpful, right? That we don't need to get ahead of where we are. However, this week was sort of a disruptive experience in when this unexpected change to kind of how we were operating came up. I wonder I don't know if we can anticipate if something happens again, but if we had more of a sense of how we might make decisions, or if, for example, if the question came up before the board and there was not a board meeting when the question came up, would we convene as a board potentially in the absence to help make a decision, or would, if things changed again, I guess how might we operate as a board? And then also, I think question the parents had was like, how do we know what to do in that situation? Like the emails that we received, the majority of emails this week were saying we really want masks in schools. We didn't hear that tonight, but that's what we kind of heard in correspondence over the week. So how, like, I think there's the question, what might be the process if something changed again, so that parents, I think I heard a lot tonight, I think we heard it in the emails too, that parent-informed choice feels very important at this moment, when there's a lot of things that are unknown. And as the rules under which you're operating shift, and I know the school district has been operating in that way for 2 years, and it's so challenging. And this week was sort of just another reminder of that so fast. I heard a comment from one of the teachers tonight. That's one lesson that she felt like she was getting from the pandemic was a pause and like looking at education. So I wonder, in this moment where we've come out of this again, can we pause and think about what the process might be? And while I might not necessarily agree with everything said there, I think there's real value in open discussion and having the opportunity to hear what parents are feeling and what the community is feeling, and also what they need to feel safe and trust the school, and then knowing how a decision might be made after that happens. And so I'm not sure. I mean, I have an idea of what that could look like, but I hope this is hypothetical and that it's sort of clear. But I just given what happened last week and given the constantly changing guidance, I think this might be a situation we come up against in the near future. And I wonder if there could be some parameters or sort of understanding how decisions get made on this a little more, like you've been relying on state guidance for a very long time. If that were to go away, what might be our process here? And we don't have to answer it now, but maybe it's just a question. What might be the board's process, your process, and then how would a decision be made? So people can know kind of at the very least what to expect, and that their voices would be heard, their concerns would be taken in, and then a decision would be made. And I think we all agree, like we're all engaged in this democratic process. And I really heard it in the literacy presentation that what we're teaching our children is the value of bringing more voices into the room and into conversation. And through that conversation, as we build on each other's ideas and really hearing each other, we get to something even bigger than what we started with. And so I think there's like real possibility here and not vitriol. And I appreciate the comments that were respectful tonight, even though there might be some things, and there were things in there that were not based in fact and true information. And so we have to but we were not involved in a dialogue, so we can't do that full thing. But I think there might be a need for that at this time.
I think it's always important that we be as clear as possible with our community. So we don't know yet what the clarity is going to be, and I certainly appreciate all that you're proposing and thinking about. I just want to suggest that another path and the clarity that we might need to provide could be there's no more state mandate, and there's no authority that we're able to gain to impose our own, in which case there might be nothing to discuss. There might just be information to put out there. And I do think, we heard appreciation this week for the transparency with the information that we received when we got it. So certainly we can pledge to make that effort. And then if there are more complicated conversations to be had, I think you make the point that we need to figure out how to have them. Yeah.
I guess I just wanted to know that many of them are not here, but I really appreciated the fact that although many of the people were speaking on behalf of getting rid of a mask mandate, all of the adults were masked and did not create any kind of situation where they were not following the mandate. And I know that has not been the case in many districts and many board meetings. So I just really want to acknowledge everyone who spoke for being respectful of the current mandate and speaking about something that was important to you, but still following the guidance. And that was really super helpful and a great relief to us to not have to sort of argue about what the mandate that was currently in place meant. So thank you.
Thank you for observing that. Yeah, that's so well observed. Thank you.
And I know from colleagues that there have been some very, very challenging meetings of late, and I think it's really worth echoing how much we appreciate our community having, very civil, maybe disagreements, but civil disagreements, and that's really important.
Yeah, and to the extent possible, if we can find ways to ensure that this doesn't become a divisive issue in our community. Clearly, people have very strongly held views on this matter, and for good reason. There's a lot at stake. Any way you look at it, there is so much at stake. And, to the extent that we can keep our community as unified as possible, despite critically important decisions on behalf of all children, that would really be a sign of success, I think, on our part. And to the extent that the authorities who really have the responsibility to make professionally informed decisions about these matters can make them and carry on, that will be helpful to us and to all school districts. And let's hope that we can count on that. Really, we've had to count on them significantly for the duration of the pandemic, and hopefully we can continue to do so.
I understand their frustration. There have been times during the pandemic where the state's advice was a little bit out of sync with other people's advice or the reality on the ground. It's just slower to respond to things. Things don't change that quickly. Tomorrow, policy doesn't necessarily change because the CDC said something yesterday. So I can understand their frustration. I think a lot of this is going to come down to sort of the way it's fallen out with vaccines. Is there'll be people who are interested in learning more, and let's look at what the data show us. Some of the speakers tonight quoted some data. I'm not sure I agree with all of it, but certainly something to look into if we ever are in a position where it is clear that it's on our plate to make a decision about this. I think we should do so with as much information as we can in terms of the facts. And unfortunately, like vaccines, it could also come down to there will be people on both sides who aren't particularly interested in the facts either, or they'll want their choice of the facts. So, there'll be a group where we can have a reasonable discussion. Let's talk about the pros and cons and stuff like that. And then there'll be groups where it's an emotional thing, and talking about numbers is not going to be particularly helpful. So I agree. I hope that this is done at a state public health type of level, not picked down to each individual school district. But I think it's something. If we have some advanced warning, we might have to begin to, do some research and find out a little bit more about these issues so that we can make an informed decision.
I do. You make a really good point there at the end. No, regardless of what happens, I hope there's some advance warning, because that was a lesson from this week for me, and I think for many of us, was that the suddenness of the announcement was very disturbing to people, understandably, and disruptive. And I will be advocating, if it is to come from the state, that they give us some sort of lead time.
And it's interesting. Almost done. A lot of the legal argument is about the constitutionality of the an executive issuing the order, as opposed to the Department of Health, as opposed to a law passed by the legislature. It's not really about the content of whether masks are useful or not. It's more, is the way it was implemented allowed? And I think people could honestly disagree about that too. You can be pro-mask and still think, well, gee, maybe this is something that should come from the legislature or something. So I think the courts aren't necessarily debating the scientific merits of it. They're debating the constitutionality of the process.
Yeah. It's just unfortunate that they couldn't see their way clear to holding off on announcing it until a Friday. So, all of the school districts in the state of New York might have had some time to address it.
Or they make decisions and then they say, look, I know this is going to be appealed, so they don't, I don't know what the legal term is, but they don't make it actionable right away. They say, this is my decision, but it's now going to go to a higher court, and I'm not going to disrupt the whole state for 12 hours because I said something.
Yeah.
Well,
It's
the
unfortunate.
best way I can look at this, and if there wasn't so much at stake, I would spend more time looking at it this way, is that all of our students from a very early age learn about the branches of government. And if there was ever an exercise that could really illuminate at every age level, really, because you could go more in depth or less in depth, checks and balances, the function of the branches of government. You could draw some really interesting pictures and develop some really interesting content around all that has occurred in just this 1 week.
Yeah.
And if you peel back the layers of the onion, even just ever more so slightly around deputy governor becoming a governor, governor the son of a former governor, I mean, it could just go on and on and on and on. A lot of good social studies content right here.
It's funny that you say that, Marjorie, because I asked my son a question the other day, and he said, "I'm not going to tell you you're a Fed." And I was like, okay, I kind of guess I am.
We're local, the opposite was true.
Yeah. All right. Any other comments, discussion?
So can I just commend Jake Kempen for his discussion around gender-neutral bathrooms, feminine products, and he did ask for a policy change, which I'm not sure where the board sits on that. But I really applaud him for coming and speaking before us again. He did so before, and I believe we were able to implement what he had asked for then. And the whole Saga Club, I think that they do wonderful work, and I really think it was a courageous thing for him to do, and we should certainly consider his request for policy change.
I do know in the past that Saga has had some events or meetings, this is pre-pandemic,
Yeah.
where the board would be
Yeah.
invited.
Yeah.
And so would you keep us updated
will.
if there is anything that
There was
we can
one that
support
I
Yeah,
wasn't
we-
able to attend, but there was something, back in our old life.
in our old
Yeah,
lives?
yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
we have attended, but
I would like
it,
to
it
go.
has been a couple of years now since we
We
had
have
an
an invite now,
opportunity.
You know what
So,
I found
but not
courageous?
everything is appropriate for the board to attend, so I
Right.
would trust Andrew to let us know, or the administration to let us know when there is something, and also to please help Jake know where he can get his concerns addressed. He doesn't have to come to a board meeting to ask for feminine products in the bathroom. If there's an issue, that really can be addressed much faster, by reaching out to individuals who are just so much better positioned to really remedy something that sounds like it needs to be
Fixable.
remedied.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. So that would be
You
great.
know what I found very courageous? That he came after 5 people were arguing one way, and he very calmly said, "I don't agree, I vote this way, I think this way," and then moved on. Like, it was like, talk about being willing to agree to disagree.
Yeah.
A lot of people wouldn't have brought up that whole
Yes.
issue just to announce in front of a room that, by the way, I don't agree with you.
Absolutely. Yeah, very mature.
Can I just ask, is the policy he's proposing, is that a board level decision or is that more an administrative level policy?
I think we'll have to look into that.
Okay.
I think he's actually also asking us to make policy out of something that's already law.
Okay.
And sometimes we say, if there's law, we don't necessarily need policy because it's
Right.
clearly the law of the land. So, but it might have a different solution that's not actually policy. It's more communication. I don't know.
And somebody will reach out, and
Yeah.
talk with him?
Oh, yeah.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anything else? All right, then I think we're ready to look to future meetings. The board is.
Policy committee meets in a few minutes.
Maybe we shouldn't go to sleep.
Yeah, all right, we'll do it that way. We'll go in order. The policy committee is meeting tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. The facilities committee is meeting on Wednesday of next week at 7 p.m. The sustainability committee will meet Friday morning, February 4th at 8:15 a.m. The board will next meet Thursday, February 10th, 7:30 p.m. here in the library. Finance meets Tuesday, February 15th, 7 p.m. The board meets again February 24th, that's Thursday at 7:30 p.m. Policy Friday, February 25th, 9 a.m. And then Saturday, February 26th, 8:30 a.m. budget deliberations. So busy month. If I didn't miss anything, then I will ask for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Liz, seconded by Catherine. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night.
I assume it is.
I think so.
Yeah.
Don't have to
Yes.
interrupt the cast.